Grandma, Daddy says you're a liar, my 6-year-old grandson Lucas whispered, his innocent blue eyes searching mine for truth. We were sitting on my porch swing in the golden afternoon light of my small Connecticut home, the place where I'd raised his mother, where I thought I was safe from the shadows of the past. His words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. The peanut butter sandwich I'd made him sat untouched on his Spider-Man plate, a testament to the weight of what he'd just said. I set down my iced tea with trembling hands, the condensation on the glass matching the cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. "What makes Daddy say that, sweetheart?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady, to hide the storm his words had unleashed inside me. "He told Mommy that you're making up stories again," Lucas said, swinging his little legs that didn't yet reach the porch floor. "That you're confused about things that happened, and we shouldn't listen to your stories anymore." Confused? Making things up? I was 72 years old, not senile. Every memory I possessed was crystal clear, especially the ones they wanted buried. The maple trees in my yard rustled in the breeze, as if whispering secrets of their own. "Lucas," I said gently, "sometimes grown-ups disagree about things that happened in the past, but Daddy says you're trying to make Mommy hate him. He gets really mad when she comes home from visiting you." Lucas picked at a loose thread on his shorts, avoiding my eyes now. "He says you're poisoning her mind with lies." Poisoning her mind? After everything I'd sacrificed for my daughter, after everything I'd endured in silence to protect her, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my arthritic knuckles whitening. "He threw a glass at the wall last night," Lucas continued, his voice dropping even lower. "When Mommy said she wanted to help you clean out the attic this weekend, the image of my son-in-law Blake's rage flashed through my mind. I'd seen glimpses of his temper over the years, carefully hidden beneath his charming exterior, the successful investment banker with the perfect smile and the iron grip on my daughter's life, the man who'd slowly isolated her from everyone who truly loved her. Did he hurt Mommy?" I asked, careful to keep my voice calm despite the thundering of my heart. Lucas shook his head. "She made me go to my room, but I heard her crying for a long time." The cicadas buzzed in the summer heat, a sound that had once brought me comfort. Now it seemed like a warning, a countdown to something terrible. I glanced at my watch. Jennifer wasn't supposed to pick Lucas up for another 2 hours. 2 hours to decide what to do with the burden of truth I'd carried for nearly 40 years. "Would you like to help me look through some old boxes?" I asked Lucas, making a decision that would change everything. "I have something very special I want to show you." "Is it a treasure?" he asked, his childish wonder momentarily overshadowing the heaviness of our conversation. "Yes," I said, taking his small hand in mine as I rose from the swing. "But not all treasure is gold and jewels, Lucas. Sometimes it's just the truth, hidden away where no one can find it." As we walked into the house, the screen door banged shut behind us with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. Jennifer had been 8 years old when I hid the letter, almost the same age as Lucas was now. I'd never intended for anyone to find it, but sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, especially when there are new graves being dug in its place. What I was about to do would fracture my family forever. But as I looked down at Lucas's innocent face, I knew I couldn't let another generation be built on lies. Some secrets aren't meant to protect the innocent but the guilty, and I had been silent long enough. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell. Most folks in Brookfield, Connecticut just call me Ellie. I've lived in this 2-story colonial for 46 years, ever since my husband Thomas and I bought it when Jennifer was just a baby. It's a modest house by Fairfield County standards, but it's mine, paid off 20 years ago with Thomas's life insurance money after the heart attack that took him at 53. The floorboards creak in all the places I expect them to, a symphony of familiar sounds that have become the soundtrack to my solitude. I know every crack in the ceiling, every stubborn window that sticks in the humid summer air. This house has been my sanctuary, and my prison, keeper of my secrets, and witness to my silent suffering. I led Lucas up the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, my hand trailing along the banister Thomas installed himself the summer of '82. My arthritis made each step a careful negotiation, but Lucas was patient, slowing his boundless energy to match my deliberate pace. His small hand in mine felt like a lifeline to a world I was increasingly separated from, a world of soccer games and superhero movies that continued spinning while I remained frozen in time. "Mommy says you used to be a teacher," Lucas said as we reached the landing. "That's right. I taught 3rd grade for 32 years at Brookfield Elementary," I replied, smiling at the memories. I loved every minute of it. What I didn't tell him was how teaching had saved me, how the classroom had become my escape, a place where I could focus on shaping young minds, instead of dwelling on the fractures in my own life. I didn't tell him how I'd thrown myself into my career after Thomas died, taking on extra committees and summer school sessions to fill the gaping emptiness in my days. Work had been my salvation, right up until retirement 5 years ago had forced me to face the silence. "My teacher, Mrs. Robinson, says I'm really good at reading," Lucas announced proudly as we walked down the hallway toward the attic door. "You are exceptional," I agreed, reaching up to pull the cord that would bring down the folding attic stairs. "You remind me of your mother at your age. She would read anything she could get her hands on." The stairs descended with a familiar groan of hinges that needed oiling. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight streaming through the small round window at the end of the attic. I took a battery-operated lantern from a hook on the wall and handed it to Lucas. "You can be my light bearer," I told him, watching his face light up with importance. The attic was stifling in the summer heat, but I barely noticed as I made my way to the far corner where old trunks and boxes created a small mountain of memories. Lucas followed, sweeping the lantern beam across forgotten Christmas decorations, bags of Jennifer's old clothes I'd never been able to part with, and boxes of Thomas's books that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco when opened. "What are we looking for, Grandma?" Lucas asked, his curiosity evident in the way he peered into every shadow. "A blue hat box," I replied, scanning the dimly lit space. "It has yellow flowers painted on the lid." I didn't tell him that I could have gone directly to it, that I knew exactly where it was, because I'd touched it every year on the anniversary of the day I put it there. Some rituals become sacred, even when they're rooted in pain. As Lucas explored, I took a moment to catch my breath, leaning against an old dresser mirror that had once belonged to my mother. The woman reflected back at me was a stranger sometimes. Silver hair cut practically short, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much, shoulders slightly stooped from carrying invisible burdens. When had I become old? It seemed to have happened overnight, a swift transition from the young mother running after a toddling Jennifer to this fragile vessel of memories and regrets. Time is cruelly efficient that way, stealing your youth while you're busy making plans, turning decades into fleeting moments that slip through your fingers like water. All the while, the important things, the truths, the warnings, the lessons, get buried under the mundane business of simply getting through each day. "Is this it?" Lucas called out, his voice pulling me back from my reflections. He was pointing to a shelf just beyond his reach, where the blue hat box sat like a time capsule waiting to be unearthed. "That's it," I confirmed, making my way over to him. "Good eye, Lucas." I carefully lifted the box down, holding it against my chest for a moment, like a long-lost friend. Or perhaps more accurately, like an old enemy I'd finally gathered the courage to face. The painted yellow daisies had faded over the years, but they still danced cheerfully around the circumference of the lid, a jarring contrast to the contents within. "Let's take this downstairs where it's cooler," I suggested, already heading toward the attic stairs. I couldn't open it here, in this stifling space where the air felt too thin to support the weight of what I was about to reveal. Lucas bounded ahead of me, excited by the mystery. As we descended, I caught sight of the family photos lining the hallway wall. Jennifer's school pictures charting her growth year by year, her high school graduation, her wedding day with Blake, his arm around her waist, possessive even then. The hospital photo after Lucas was born, Jennifer looking exhausted but radiant, Blake beaming with pride at his new son. So many captured moments, each one preserving a sliver of truth while obscuring the larger reality beneath. That's the problem with photographs. They only show you what was in front of the lens, never what was happening just outside the frame. And some truths can't be captured on film. They have to be written down, preserved in ink that won't fade like memory or be distorted by time. The kind of truth I'd sealed away in this hat box nearly 4 decades ago, when the burden of knowing became too heavy to bear alone. "What's inside it, Grandma?" Lucas asked as we settled back onto the couch in my living room, the ancient air conditioner humming valiantly against the July heat. "A letter," I said simply, removing the lid. "A very important letter that your mommy has never seen." The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March, almost 7 years ago. I was kneading bread dough at my kitchen counter, flour dusting my forearms, when Jennifer's ringtone, Brown-Eyed Girl, her father's favorite song, filled the kitchen. "Mom," she said, her voice strained in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Blake thinks it would be better if you didn't come over for dinner this weekend." My hands stilled in the dough. Jennifer and Blake had just moved into their new colonial-style house in Westport, an affluent town about 20 minutes from Brookfield. The housewarming dinner had been planned for weeks. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Are you not feeling well?" There was a pause, filled only by her breathing. I could picture her twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since Blake had placed it there 4 years earlier. "We're fine. It's just, Blake thinks we need some space right now." Another pause. "From family. From me," she meant. "Not family, just me." "I see," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. Not then. Did I do something to upset him?" Jennifer sighed, a sound weighted with a tension I couldn't fully decipher. "He said you were undermining him at Lucas's birthday party last weekend, when you told Lucas he could have a second piece of cake after Blake had already said no." I stared at my hands, now motionless in the half-kneaded dough. It was his birthday, Jennifer. A second slice of cake hardly seemed. "It's not about the cake, Mom," she cut in, her voice sharpening. "It's about respect. Blake says you don't respect his authority as Lucas's father, that you deliberately contradict him in front of Lucas. Authority. The word hung between us, loaded with implications I didn't want to examine too closely. I thought of Blake's rigid schedule for Lucas, the way the 4-year-old's face fell when his father scolded him for coloring outside the lines, the silent meals where Lucas was expected to sit perfectly still. "I'm sorry if it came across that way," I said carefully. "That wasn't my intention. Blake says your intentions don't matter if the result undermines his parenting. Blake says. Blake thinks. Blake wants." The chorus was becoming familiar, a refrain that preceded every change in Jennifer's life since she'd met him in her junior year of college. "Blake says you work too hard. Blake thinks teaching isn't ambitious enough. Blake wants us to move to Westport." A slow, subtle erosion of the independent, vibrant girl I'd raised. "Will you tell Lucas I'm sorry I won't see him this weekend?" I asked, swallowing my pride. "I picked up that dinosaur book he wanted." "I'll tell him," Jennifer said, her voice softening slightly. "Maybe next weekend." But next weekend became next month, and then the summer. Invitations were rescinded last minute. Planned visits canceled because Lucas was suddenly too tired or coming down with something. My phone calls went to voicemail more often than not, and when Jennifer did answer, I could hear the caution in her voice, as if someone was listening to her side of the conversation. The breaking point came that September. I hadn't seen Lucas or Jennifer in nearly 6 weeks when I drove past their Westport house on my way home from a dental appointment. I hadn't planned to stop, knew it might cause problems, but when I saw Jennifer's car in the driveway, some impulse made me turn in. Maybe I could just drop off the books I'd bought for Lucas. A quick hello and goodbye. Nothing that could be construed as intrusive. I rang the doorbell, smoothing my hair nervously while I waited. When Jennifer opened the door, her face registered shock before quickly composing itself into a polite mask. She was thinner than when I'd last seen her, the bones in her face more prominent, but it was the dark circles under her eyes that caught my attention, poorly concealed with makeup. "Mom," she said, not opening the door further. "This isn't a good time. I was just passing by," I explained, holding up the bag of books. "I thought Lucas might like these." "Thank you, but we're in the middle of something." Her eyes darted behind her, toward the interior of the house. "I'll call you later, okay?" But as she moved to close the door, a small voice called out from inside. "Grandma?" And then Lucas was there, squeezing past his mother's legs before she could stop him, throwing his arms around my waist. "Grandma, I missed you. I missed you too, sweetheart," I said, hugging him tightly, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. "Lucas, go back inside," Jennifer said, her voice tight with tension. "Grandma was just leaving." Lucas pulled back to look at me, confusion clouding his face. "But you just got here." "I know, buddy. I can't stay today, but I brought you some new books." I handed him the bag, which he took eagerly. "Dinosaurs!" he exclaimed, peeking inside. "Can you read them to me?" Before I could respond, the front door opened wider, and Blake stood there, imposing in his crisp button-down shirt and slacks despite it being a Saturday. His handsome face was arranged in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his tone coolly polite. "What a surprise." I was just dropping off some books for Lucas, I explained, feeling inexplicably like I needed to justify my presence at my own daughter's home. How thoughtful. Blake placed a hand on Jennifer's shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed affectionate to an outside observer, but I didn't miss how her posture stiffened at his touch. But as Jennifer said, this isn't a good time. We were just discussing some family matters. Family matters. The phrase settled like ice in my stomach. I was family, wasn't I? Of course, I said, taking a step back. I don't want to intrude. Grandma, can't you stay for a little bit? Lucas pleaded, still clutching the bag of books. Please? Blake's hand moved from Jennifer's shoulder to Lucas's, squeezing slightly. Grandma has to go now, champ. Say goodbye. But, Lucas. Blake's voice hardened just enough to make the boy fall silent. What did we say about interrupting adults? Lucas's small shoulders slumped. Not to do it. That's right. Blake ruffled his hair, a gesture that should have been affectionate, but somehow seemed performative. Say goodbye to Grandma now. Goodbye, Grandma, Lucas mumbled, his earlier excitement extinguished. As I turned to leave, I caught Jennifer's eye. There was something there. A plea, a warning, an apology. I couldn't quite decipher, but before I could try, Blake closed the door, leaving me standing alone on the porch, the sound of the lock clicking into place with terrible finality. It was on the drive home, tears blurring my vision, that I first allowed myself to name the fear that had been growing in my heart. My daughter was trapped in a controlling marriage, and I had no idea how to help her. That night, Jennifer called. Mom, she said, her voice eerily calm. Blake and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we took a break from visits for a while. Jennifer, please, I began, panic rising in my throat. Whatever I've done, it's not what you've done, she interrupted. It's what you might do. Blake is concerned about your influence on Lucas. He thinks you're trying to turn him against his father. The accusation was so absurd, so wildly unfair, that for a moment I couldn't speak. That's ridiculous, I finally managed. I would never. Blake says you undermine his parenting at every opportunity, that you coddle Lucas and make him question his father's authority. There it was again. Authority. As if parenting was about power, rather than love. Jennifer, this isn't right, I said, my voice breaking. This isn't you talking. These are Blake's words. See? This is exactly what he means. Her voice hardened. You can't accept that I make my own decisions, that I agree with my husband about what's best for our son. Do you? I challenged, desperation making me reckless. Do you really think cutting me out of Lucas's life is what's best for him? Or are you just trying to keep Blake from getting angry? The silence that followed was deafening. Don't call here anymore, Mom, she finally said, her voice distant. We'll contact you when we're ready. The line went dead, leaving me clutching the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an accusation. 6 months passed. 6 months of unanswered calls, returned birthday cards, and sleepless nights worrying about what was happening behind the closed doors of that perfect colonial in Westport. I drove by a few times, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jennifer or Lucas, but the house remained shuttered, impenetrable. Then, on a rainy April morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jennifer standing there, soaked to the skin, holding Lucas's hand. Her left eye was swollen shut, a purple bruise blooming across her cheekbone. Mom, she whispered, her good eye filling with tears. I need help. I pulled them both inside without a word, my heart breaking and mending all at once. She'd come home. Finally, she'd come home. But the knife Blake had planted in her back, in all our backs, had gone deeper than any of us realized, and the wound would take far more than a mother's love to heal. I sat across from Lucas at my kitchen table, the blue hatbox between us. Outside, the afternoon light had taken on that golden quality that makes everything it touches seem precious and fleeting, like childhood itself. Before I show you what's in this box, I said, I want to tell you a story about your mom when she was little. Lucas nodded solemnly, his small hands folded on the table, mimicking my posture without realizing it. I smiled at the unconscious gesture, seeing echoes of Jennifer in his serious expression. Your mom was about your age when her daddy, your grandfather Thomas, built her a treehouse in the big oak that used to stand in our backyard. The one that got hit by lightning? Lucas asked. Jennifer had told him that story then. That's right, I confirmed. It was a beautiful treehouse with real windows and a little porch where she could sit and read. Your grandfather spent every weekend for a month building it. even though he worked 6 days a week at the post office. His hands were always rough and calloused, but he never complained. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering Thomas's quiet dedication, his gentle hands that could sort mail all day, and then come home to frame miniature windows with the same careful precision. One weekend, I was hanging laundry in the yard when I heard your mom crying up in the treehouse. I climbed up, which wasn't easy in a dress, let me tell you, and found her huddled in the corner. She had a splinter in her finger, a big one that had gone deep under her skin. Lucas winced sympathetically, instinctively checking his own fingers. I didn't have tweezers with me, and it was too painful to pull out with my fingernails, so I carried her down the ladder and into the house to fix it. But Jennifer didn't want me to touch it. She wanted to wait for her daddy to come home. "Why?" Lucas asked. "Because she knew he would do it so carefully that it would hardly hurt at all," I explained. "That's the kind of man your grandfather was. Gentle, patient. He'd spend 20 minutes getting out a splinter if that's what it took to spare Jennifer pain." I reached for a photo album on the sideboard, flipping it open to a page showing Thomas giving a young Jennifer a piggyback ride, both of their faces alight with laughter. "Your grandfather worked hard so I could stay home with your mom until she started school. Then, when she was in 1st grade, I went back to teaching. Money was tight, but we made it work. When Jennifer needed braces, your grandfather took a second job delivering newspapers in the mornings. When she wanted dance lessons, I tutored after school to pay for them." "Mom used to dance?" Lucas asked, surprised. I nodded. "Ballet and jazz. She was quite good." I didn't add that Blake had subtly discouraged her from continuing after they started dating, suggesting it was childish to spend so much time on a hobby that would never be a career. When your mom was in high school, she got accepted to a summer writing program at Yale. It cost more money than we had, but your grandfather and I were so proud. We couldn't let her miss that opportunity. So he sold his fishing boat, the one thing he loved just for himself, and I picked up summer school classes to teach. Lucas studied the photographs, his fingers tracing the outline of Thomas's face. "He looks nice." "He was the best man I've ever known," I said softly. "When he had his heart attack, your mom was 19 and in her 2nd year of college. She wanted to drop out and come home to help me, but I wouldn't let her." "Why not?" "Because that's not what parents do," I explained. "We don't let our children sacrifice their futures for us. We make the sacrifices for them." I turned a few more pages in the album, showing Lucas pictures of his mother's college graduation. Thomas had been gone 3 years by then, but his absence was a tangible thing in those photos, a negative space around which Jennifer and I had arranged our smiles. After your grandfather died, things were hard. The life insurance helped, but I still had to work extra hours. Sometimes I'd grade papers until midnight and then get up at 5 to prepare lessons. But we managed. Your mom graduated with honors and got a job at that publishing house in New York. She was so excited. I closed the album gently, the memories it contained both precious and painful. She met your dad a year later. Lucas looked up at me, his expression serious beyond his years. And that's when things changed? A perceptive child, just like his mother. "Yes," I admitted. "That's when things began to change." I turned my attention back to the blue hat box, running my fingers along its faded lid. "When your mom first brought Blake home to meet me, I was happy for her. He was handsome and successful, and she seemed to adore him. But something felt off." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked. "It's hard to explain," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes when a person loves you the wrong way, it can look a lot like the right way at first. Your dad made big romantic gestures, expensive gifts, surprise vacations, but he also had very specific ideas about how your mom should dress, who she should be friends with, even what she should order at restaurants." Lucas's brow furrowed. "He does that with me too. He always tells me what I'm going to eat before the waitress even comes." A small observation that spoke volumes. I nodded, acknowledging his insight without commenting further. "After they got engaged, your mom started visiting less often. When she did come over, she'd check her phone constantly, nervous if Blake called, and she didn't answer right away. She stopped seeing her old friends from college, said they were immature, but those were Blake's words, not hers. I remembered the gradual transformation, How my vibrant, independent daughter had slowly adopted Blake's opinions, his preferences, his worldview, until I sometimes struggled to find the real Jennifer underneath. When they got married, I tried to be supportive. That's what mothers do. We want our children to be happy. The wedding was exactly what Blake wanted, down to the color of the napkins. Your mom seemed resigned more than excited, but I told myself it was just wedding stress. I hadn't told her what I really thought, that she was making a mistake, that Blake's controlling behavior would only get worse. I'd hoped I was wrong, prayed I was wrong. After you were born, I continued, I thought things might improve. Blake seemed proud to be a father, but soon he started having very rigid ideas about how you should be raised. No sugar, no cartoons, educational toys only. Like my train set that plays the alphabet? Lucas asked. Exactly, I confirmed. Educational toys are wonderful, but childhood should also have some pure joy, don't you think? Magic and mess and silly things that make you laugh. Lucas nodded emphatically. Like when we made cookies and you let me put in too many chocolate chips. And they were the best cookies ever, weren't they? I smiled, remembering the look of delight on his face as he dumped nearly an entire bag of chocolate chips into the dough. The best, he agreed. I reached across the table and took his small hand in mine. Lucas, I want you to know that everything I've ever done, I've done because I love your mom, and I love you, even when it meant keeping secrets. Like what's in the box? He asked, his curiosity returning. Yes, I said, like what's in the box. I lifted the lid carefully, revealing a stack of yellowed envelopes tied with a faded ribbon, a small velvet jewelry box, and beneath them, a sealed envelope with "For Jennifer" written on the front in my careful handwriting. These are letters your grandfather wrote to me when we were dating, I explained, touching the stack of envelopes reverently. He was stationed in Germany for a year with the army before we got married. I opened the velvet box next, revealing a simple silver locket. This was your great-grandmother's. I was saving it to give to your mom on her 30th birthday, but by then, I trailed off, remembering how distant Jennifer had become by that milestone, how firmly under Blake's influence. But it's the last thing, I said, picking up the sealed envelope, that I really want you to see. I broke the seal, my hands trembling slightly as I extracted the letter I'd written nearly 40 years ago after Thomas's funeral, when Jennifer was away at college and I was alone with my grief and my secrets. I wrote this for your mom, I explained to Lucas, to give to her when she was older, when I thought she'd be ready to hear the truth, but I never found the right moment. And then, after she met your dad, I was afraid it would hurt her too much. I unfolded the letter, the paper crackling softly between my fingers. The words I'd written so long ago swam before my eyes, bringing back the night I'd sat at this very table, pouring out the truth I'd kept hidden for my daughter's entire life. Your grandfather, I said softly, was not Jennifer's biological father. Lucas's eyes widened. What? Thomas adopted Jennifer when she was a baby, after I married him. Her real father was a man I dated in college named Robert Caldwell. When I told him I was pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. He was from a wealthy family, you see, with political ambitions. An unplanned pregnancy with a girl from the wrong side of town didn't fit his image. I had never spoken these words aloud to anyone. They felt strange in my mouth, both foreign and familiar, like a language I'd forgotten I knew. Thomas was my friend first. He helped me through that difficult time, drove me to doctor appointments, held my hand when I was scared. We fell in love slowly, over cups of tea and long walks and conversations about books. He married me when I was 7 months pregnant and adopted Jennifer as his own the day she was born. I looked down at the letter in my hands. In here, I explained everything to Jennifer, how her biological father had rejected us both, how Thomas had chosen to be her father, had loved her unconditionally from the moment he first held her. I wanted her to know that family isn't always blood, but it's always love. Does Mom know? Lucas asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I never found the courage to tell her. Thomas wanted to when she was 18, but I was afraid it would hurt her. And then he died, and it felt like telling her would be taking something else away from her. Her certainty about who she was, where she came from. I folded the letter again carefully. But there's something else in here that I didn't know was important until much later. Something about Jennifer's biological father that connects to your dad. Lucas leaned forward, his eyes intent on my face. What is it? Robert Caldwell, I said, was Blake's uncle. The words hung in the air between us, their weight and implication too complex for Lucas to fully grasp, but he sensed the importance. Blake's uncle? He repeated, trying to process this information. So, Dad and Mom are related? Not by blood, I clarified quickly. Robert was Blake's father's brother. Blake and Jennifer aren't biologically related at all, but Blake knows who Jennifer really is. He's always known. How? Lucas asked, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. Because 7 years ago, just before your dad started cutting me out of your lives, Robert Caldwell contacted me. He was dying of cancer and wanted to make amends. He told me that Blake had approached him years earlier, asking about his past. Robert had mentioned me, and the child he'd abandoned. Blake must have put it together when he met Jennifer. I looked out the window at the lengthening shadows across my lawn. I think that's why he pursued her in the first place, why he married her, as some twisted form of control, or revenge, or ownership, taking what his uncle had rejected and making it his. It was a terrible thing to say, especially to a child about his father, but the pieces had fallen into place for me over the years, and I couldn't unsee the pattern they formed. The night Robert called me, I continued, I told him I'd kept his identity a secret all these years, that Jennifer didn't know about him. He seemed relieved, said it was better that way. But he also warned me about Blake, said he was troubled, dangerous even, that I should watch out for Jennifer. I reached back into the hat box and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper I'd tucked inside the envelope. Robert sent me this the week before he died. It's a check for $500,000 made out to Jennifer. His attempt to make up for a lifetime of absence, I suppose. I never cashed it, never told Jennifer about it. Part of me felt she deserved that money, but a bigger part couldn't bear to open this whole painful history. Lucas stared at the check, his eyes wide at the amount written there. That's a lot of money. Yes, it is, I agreed. Money that could have given your mom options. Freedom. A way out when things started going bad with Blake. The weight of my mistake pressed down on me like a physical force. By trying to protect Jennifer from a painful truth, I'd left her vulnerable to a far more dangerous reality. I should have told her everything as soon as Robert contacted me, I said, regret coloring my voice. I should have warned her about Blake, given her the check, but I was a coward. I kept my secrets thinking I was sparing her pain, when all I did was leave her unprepared for the danger she was in. Lucas reached across the table and placed his small hand over mine, a gesture so like his mother's that my heart ached. You were trying to be good, Grandma, he said simply. His forgiveness, offered so freely, broke something open inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I covered his hand with my own. Yes, I whispered. I was trying to be good, but sometimes being good isn't the same as doing right. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking time as it always had, indifferent to the secrets and sorrows laid bare beneath it. Lucas and I sat in silence for a moment, his young mind processing as much as it could of what I'd shared, my old one heavy with the burden of too many years of silence. Lucas, I finally said, I'm showing you this now because I need your help. Your mom is in danger, and so are you. Your dad, he's not who he pretends to be, and I think deep down, you know that. Lucas nodded slowly, his eyes wiser than his years. He gets really mad sometimes. He breaks things, and Mom cries a lot when she thinks I can't hear. Each word was a knife to my heart, confirmation of my worst fears. That's not right, sweetheart. That's not how families are supposed to be. I know, he said quietly. My friend Jake's dad doesn't yell like that, and his mom smiles all the time. I want to help your mom, I told him, gathering the letter and the check and placing them back in the envelope. But first, she needs to know the truth, all of it, including this. I held up the envelope. When she comes to pick you up today, I'm going to give her this letter, and I need you to be brave, Lucas, because things might get complicated for a little while. Will it make Mom stop being sad? He asked, the question breaking my heart with its simplicity and its weight. I hope so, I said, though I knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. I hope it will give her the strength to make some hard choices. As I put everything back into the hat box except for the sealed letter, I sent up a silent prayer, to Thomas, to whatever God might be listening, that I wasn't too late, that the secrets I'd kept for so long, out of love and fear and misguided protection, wouldn't cost us everything. Because some truths, no matter how painful, can no longer remain buried when lives hang in the balance. And Jennifer's life, her real life, not the carefully controlled existence Blake had crafted for her, had been buried long enough. The sound of tires on gravel announced Jennifer's arrival 2 hours later, right on schedule. Lucas and I had spent the intervening time looking through old photo albums, my heart swelling as I watched him discover images of his mother as a child, gap-toothed and grinning, her hair in lopsided pigtails, eyes bright with a joy that had long since dimmed. "She looks happy," Lucas had observed, touching a photo of 8-year-old Jennifer, covered in mud after a rainstorm, proudly displaying a handful of worms. "She was," I confirmed. "She was a very happy child." Now, as Jennifer's sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway, I felt my resolve wavering. The letter sat on the coffee table between us, its presence as commanding as a shout in a silent room. Was I doing the right thing? Or was I about to fracture what little relationship remained between my daughter and me? "Lucas, go get your backpack," I instructed gently. "Your mom's here." As he scampered upstairs, I moved to the front door, smoothing my shirt nervously, the letter clutched in my hand. Jennifer was already on the porch when I opened the door, her hand raised to knock. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the fading evening light, and a high-necked blouse despite the summer heat. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Is Lucas ready?" "He's just getting his things," I replied, stepping back to let her in. "Would you like some iced tea while you wait?" Jennifer hesitated, then shook her head. "Blake's expecting us for dinner." She glanced at her watch, an elegant timepiece that I knew had been Blake's gift for their 5th anniversary. "We should really get going." "Jennifer," I said softly, "I need to talk to you about something important." She stiffened, her posture suddenly defensive. "Mom, please, not now. It's been a nice day for Lucas. Let's not ruin it with another argument." "This isn't about an argument," I insisted, taking a step toward her. "This is about your safety, and Lucas's." Jennifer's face hardened behind her sunglasses. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, Lucas came bounding down the stairs, his Spider-Man backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom!" he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her waist. "Grandma showed me pictures of you when you were my age." Jennifer's hand automatically came to rest on Lucas's head, her fingers gently threading through his hair. "That's nice, sweetie." Her voice softened when she spoke to him, a glimpse of the Jennifer I remembered. "Did you have fun?" "Uh-huh." Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "And Grandma told me a story about Great-Grandma's locket, and Grandpa Thomas, and—" "Lucas," I interrupted gently, "why don't you go wait in the car for a minute? I need to talk to your mom privately." Lucas glanced between us, his expression suddenly serious beyond his years. "Is it about the letter?" he asked. Jennifer's gaze snapped to me. "What letter?" I held up the envelope, my hand steadier than I felt. "Jennifer, there's something I've needed to tell you for a very long time. Something about your father, your biological father." All color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Dad was my father. Thomas was your father in every way that matters," I agreed. "He loved you from the moment you were born, but he wasn't your biological father." Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, shock written across her features. "You're lying." "I'm not," I said quietly. "And I think, deep down, you've always known something wasn't quite right. Why else would Blake have been so determined to keep you away from me? He knows the truth, Jennifer. He's always known." "Blake?" she repeated, confusion clouding her features. "What does Blake have to do with this?" "Lucas, please go to the car now," I said, my eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. For once, he didn't argue, slipping past us and out the front door, the screen banging shut behind him. "Your biological father's name was Robert Caldwell," I continued once Lucas was out of earshot. "He was Blake's uncle." Jennifer ripped off her sunglasses, revealing what the dark lenses had hidden, a yellowish bruise fading around her left eye. "That's insane," she hissed. "You're making this up to try to turn me against my husband." "I wish I were," I said, my heart breaking at the sight of her injury. "Everything is explained in this letter. I wrote it years ago, but never had the courage to give it to you. And there's something else inside, something Robert sent me before he died. Money that belongs to you, Jennifer. Money that could help you start over, away from Blake." I held out the envelope, but Jennifer made no move to take it. "I don't believe you," she said, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her uncertainty. "Then read the letter," I urged. "Look at the check. It's real, Jennifer. All of it. Blake found out who you were, tracked you down deliberately. Don't you see? That's why he was so charming at first. Why he swept you off your feet. He wanted to possess you, to control the daughter his uncle rejected." Jennifer's breathing had become rapid, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow bursts. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. Think about it," I pressed, desperate now. "How he isolated you from your friends. How he monitors your phone, your clothes, your food. How he makes Lucas afraid to be a child. None of that is love, Jennifer. It's control." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirrings of long-suppressed doubt. But then the sound of another car in the driveway shattered the moment. Jennifer's face drained of all remaining color. "Oh, God," she whispered. "He followed me." The front door burst open without a knock, and Blake stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his handsome face arranged in a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He was dressed impeccably as always, his charcoal suit without a wrinkle, his silver tie a perfect match for his prematurely graying hair. "There you are, sweetheart," he said to Jennifer, his voice pleasant but with an underlying edge that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "Lucas said you were having a private conversation with your mother. I thought I'd join you." His gaze fell to the envelope in my hand, and something dangerous flashed across his features. "What's that?" he asked, still smiling. Before I could respond, Jennifer stepped between us. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just some old photos Mom wanted to show me. We were actually just leaving." She reached for the envelope, but I held it back. "Jennifer, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Read it. For Lucas's sake, if not your own." Blake moved then, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "I think that's enough family time for today," he said, taking Jennifer's arm in what appeared to be a gentle grip, but made her wince. "We really should be going. Lucas has homework, and I have an early meeting tomorrow." I stood my ground, decades of maternal instinct overriding my fear of this man who had systematically dismantled my daughter's life. "Jennifer is free to leave whenever she wants," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I think you should go without her, Blake. She and Lucas can stay here tonight." Blake's facade of pleasantness slipped for just an instant, revealing the rage simmering beneath. "That's not how this works, Eleanor. My family leaves together. Always." "Mom," Jennifer said, her voice thin with tension. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We'll talk another time." I looked into her eyes, searching for the brave, independent girl I'd raised. The one who had stood up to bullies on the playground, who had delivered her valedictorian speech with such confidence, who had once dreamed of writing novels that would change the world. In her place stood a woman diminished, her spirit worn down by years of subtle and not so subtle abuse. "There might not be another time," I said softly, and pressed the envelope into her hand. "Keep this safe. Read it when you're alone." Blake's hand shot out, snatching the envelope before Jennifer could close her fingers around it. "What's this really about, Eleanor?" he demanded, all pretense of politeness gone. "More of your manipulative nonsense? Another attempt to turn my wife against me?" "Blake, don't," Jennifer pleaded, reaching for the envelope. "Let's just go home." But Blake was already tearing open the seal, pulling out the letter and the folded check. His eyes scanned the first few lines of my handwriting, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Oh, this is rich," he said, looking up at me with cold triumph. "You're finally telling her about dear Uncle Robert? After all these years?" Jennifer's gaze darted between us. "You knew?" she whispered to Blake. "You knew about this?" "Of course I knew," Blake scoffed, still holding the letter out of her reach. "Uncle Robert told me all about his college fling with a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, how she tried to trap him with a pregnancy, how he paid her off to disappear. He never paid me a cent," I said, anger flaring hot in my chest. "He wanted nothing to do with Jennifer or me. Thomas was twice the man Robert ever was." Blake unfolded the check, whistling low as he saw the amount. $500,000, he said, looking at Jennifer with a raised eyebrow. "Your mother's been holding out on us, sweetheart. This could have paid for that vacation house in Vermont we've been looking at. That money is Jennifer's," I said firmly. "Robert sent it for her, not for you. Jennifer doesn't need it," Blake replied dismissively. "She has me to provide for her. Isn't that right, Jennifer?" My daughter stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the check in Blake's hand, her world visibly rearranging itself around these new revelations. "You married me because of who my father was?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "I married you because you were perfect," Blake said, his tone softening to the charming cadence that had won her over years ago. "Beautiful, accomplished, and so eager to please. The fact that you were Robert's daughter was just poetic justice. He rejected you, but I chose you. I gave you everything he didn't. You gave me nothing," Jennifer said, the words so quiet I almost missed them. "You took everything from me. My friends, my career, my mother, my self-respect." Something dangerous flashed in Blake's eyes. "Let's not do this here," he said, reaching for her arm again. "We'll discuss this at home." "No," Jennifer said, stepping back from his grasp. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The silence that followed was electric, charged with years of suppressed tension and fear. Blake's handsome face hardened into something ugly, something I'd always suspected lurked beneath the polished surface. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing register I'd never heard before. "Lucas is waiting in the car. We're going home now. Lucas can stay here tonight," Jennifer said, standing straighter than she had in years. "With me," Blake laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "And what? You think you can just leave me? Start over with Mommy's help and a check from a dead man?" He held up the check between two fingers. "This is the only copy, I assume." Before either of us could react, he tore the check into pieces, letting them flutter to the floor between us. "There. Problem solved." "It doesn't matter," I said, finding courage in Jennifer's newfound defiance. "The money isn't important. What matters is that Jennifer knows the truth now. All of it." "The truth?" Blake echoed mockingly. "The truth is that you're a manipulative old woman who can't stand that your daughter chose me over you. The truth is that Jennifer is coming home with me right now, or I'll make sure she never sees Lucas again." Jennifer gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You wouldn't I?" Blake challenged, his voice silky with threat. "Who do you think a judge would favor? A successful businessman with a spotless reputation, or a mentally unstable woman with a history of depression who abandoned her family on the word of her interfering mother?" It was a glimpse into the private hell Jennifer had been living, the calculated threats that kept her prisoner in her own life. I felt sick with the realization of how complete his control had become. "That's enough," I said, moving to stand beside my daughter. "Get out of my house, Blake. Now." Blake's face contorted with rage, his carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. "You don't give me orders," he snarled, advancing on me with clenched fists. "You've been a thorn in my side for years, trying to poison Jennifer against me, undermining my authority with Lucas. I should have cut you out of our lives completely from the beginning." "Blake, stop," Jennifer pleaded, stepping between us. "This isn't helping anything." "You're defending her?" he demanded, rounding on Jennifer. "After everything I've done for you? I gave you a beautiful home, a perfect life. I took you when no one else would have wanted you, the unwanted daughter of a man who threw you away like garbage." Jennifer flinched as if he'd struck her, but she held her ground. "I think my mom is right," she said quietly. "I think you should leave. We can talk tomorrow when you've calmed down." Blake's laugh was ugly, threatening. "You think I'm going to just walk away and leave you here? Let her fill your head with more lies? Let her turn my son against me?" He grabbed Jennifer's arm roughly. "We're leaving. Now." I moved without thinking, decades of protective instinct overriding my fear. I pulled Jennifer back, placing myself between her and Blake. "Don't touch her again," I warned. Blake's face twisted with contempt. "Or what, Eleanor? What exactly do you think you can do to stop me?" The front door opened again, and we all turned to see Lucas standing there, his small face pale and frightened. "Dad?" he said uncertainly. "Why are you yelling at Grandma and Mom?" Blake's expression shifted instantly, the rage disappearing behind a mask of fatherly concern. "Everything's fine, champ," he said, his voice suddenly gentle. "Mom and Grandma and I were just having a grown-up discussion. It's time to go home now." Lucas didn't move from the doorway, his eyes moving from Blake to Jennifer to me. "I heard you from the car," he said. "You were saying mean things." "Lucas, please wait outside," Jennifer said, her voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. "Listen to your mother, Lucas," Blake commanded, his tone hardening slightly. But Lucas stood his ground, courage shining in his young face. "Grandma says you're hurting Mom," he said to Blake. "She showed me the pictures of when Mom was little. She was happy then. She doesn't look happy anymore." Blake's expression darkened. "Your grandmother doesn't know what she's talking about," he said dismissively. "She's confused, getting old. She makes up stories." "That's what you told me," Lucas said, his voice small but determined. "But I don't think Grandma is a liar." He looked at Jennifer, his eyes pleading. "Mom, can we stay here tonight? Please?" It was the simplest of questions, asked with a child's direct innocence. Yet it hung in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge that could no longer be ignored. Jennifer looked at her son, then at me, then finally at Blake. In her eyes, I saw years of fear and confusion, but also something else, a spark of the woman she had been before him, the daughter I had raised to stand on her own. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, Lucas, we're staying here tonight." Blake's face went completely still, a predator assessing its prey. "Jennifer," he said, a warning in his tone. "Don't do this." "It's already done," she replied, moving to stand beside Lucas, placing a protective arm around his shoulders. "Please leave, Blake. We can talk tomorrow after we've all had time to think." "If you do this," Blake said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "there's no coming back. I won't forgive it." Jennifer met his gaze steadily. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness." Something shifted in Blake's expression then, a realization that he was losing control of the situation, of her. His eyes narrowed as he looked from Jennifer to Lucas to me, calculating his next move. "Fine," he said finally, his voice cold with barely contained fury. "Have your little sleepover. We'll see how you feel in the morning, when you remember who pays the mortgage, who buys Lucas's clothes, who makes every decision that keeps your comfortable life running." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back at Jennifer with a smile that chilled my blood. "And when you come crawling back tomorrow, begging for forgiveness, just remember, I won't forget this betrayal. Not ever." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. We stood in silence, listening to his car start and the tires squeal as he pulled out of the driveway. Jennifer collapsed then, her legs giving out as the adrenaline left her system. I caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to the couch, Lucas rushing to her other side. "Mom?" he said, his voice thick with worry. "Are you okay?" Jennifer pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered into his hair. "We're both okay now." I sat beside them, placing a hand on Jennifer's shoulder, feeling the tremors that ran through her body. "You did it," I said softly. "You stood up to him." Jennifer looked up at me, her eyes red but clear. "I should have done it years ago," she said. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything, for not seeing what he was doing, for shutting you out. None of that matters now," I assured her, squeezing her shoulder. "What matters is that you're both safe, and we're going to keep it that way." Lucas wiggled out of Jennifer's embrace, looking at us both with solemn eyes. "Is Dad a bad person?" he asked. Jennifer and I exchanged a glance, the question hanging heavy between us. How do you explain to a child that his father, the man he idolizes, is not the hero he pretends to be? "Your dad has some problems," Jennifer said carefully. "Problems that make it hard for him to be kind sometimes. But that doesn't mean you have to stop loving him." "But we're not going home," Lucas pressed. Jennifer took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No, sweetheart, I don't think we're going home. Not tonight. And maybe not for a while." Lucas nodded, processing this in his own way. "Can I have my own room here?" he asked, practical concerns asserting themselves as they often do with children, even in the midst of crisis. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. "Yes," I said. "You can have your mom's old room, the one with the big window that looks out at where the treehouse used to be." As I watched Jennifer pull Lucas close again, murmuring reassurances in his ear, I felt a weight begin to lift from my shoulders. The weight of secrets kept too long, of truths left unspoken, of fears confirmed, but finally faced. The road ahead would not be easy. Blake would not simply disappear from their lives, especially not from Lucas's. There would be lawyers, and custody battles and financial entanglements to unravel. Jennifer would need to find her strength again, to rebuild the confidence that Blake had systematically dismantled over years. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, the truth, however painful, had finally set them free. And as I went to put fresh sheets on Jennifer's old bed, I sent up a silent thank you to Thomas for his love, his example of what a real father should be, and for watching over us even now, when we needed him most. Some secrets, I realized, are kept out of fear, some out of love, and sometimes it's impossible to tell the difference until the truth finally breaks free. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Jennifer and Lucas stayed with me, occupying my small house with their suitcases and toys, and the nervous energy of people living in limbo. The first few days were the hardest. Blake called constantly, his messages alternating between rage and saccharine pleas. Jennifer changed her phone number after the 5th day, when his threats became too explicit to ignore. "He says he'll take Lucas away from me," she whispered one night, after Lucas had gone to bed, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold, "that he'll make sure I never see him again. He's trying to scare you into going back," I told her, reaching across the kitchen table to squeeze her hand. "Don't let him." She nodded, but I could see the fear lurking in her eyes, the doubt that had been planted there over years of subtle manipulation. What if he's right? What if a judge believes him? He's so good at making people see what he wants them to see. "Then we'll fight," I said simply. Together, we found her a lawyer the next day, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and custody battles. I emptied my modest savings account to pay the retainer, waving away Jennifer's protests. "This is what parents do," I reminded her. "We help our children when they need it most." The morning after our meeting with Patricia, I came downstairs to find Jennifer at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles underscored her eyes, but there was something different about her posture, a straightness to her spine that had been missing for years. "What's all this?" I asked, moving to put on coffee. Jennifer looked up, her expression determined. "I'm gathering evidence, bank statements, emails, text messages. Patricia says we need to document everything, the control, the isolation, the financial abuse." She held up a thumb drive. I backed up his computer before I left. "He doesn't know I had the passwords. There's proof here that he's been moving money offshore, hiding assets, and emails to Robert from years ago, asking about me before we ever met." Her voice hardened. "He planned all of this, Mom. Finding me, marrying me. It was all deliberate." I sat beside her, scanning the documents spread across the table. "You know this won't be easy," I said carefully. "Blake won't just walk away." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm not running anymore, and I'm not hiding." She met my gaze, her eyes clear and resolute. "I've spent 7 years being afraid of that man. I won't spend another day living in fear." It was the first time since she'd arrived on my doorstep that I truly believed she wouldn't go back to him. That the daughter I'd raised, brave, determined, resilient, was finding her way back to herself. The transformation continued in small ways over the following weeks. Jennifer cut her hair short, a style Blake had always forbidden as unfeminine. She enrolled Lucas in the local summer day camp, ignoring Blake's furious emails about undermining his educational plan. She started writing again in the evenings, filling notebooks with the stories Blake had dismissed as a waste of time. But it wasn't until the day of the preliminary custody hearing that I saw just how profound the change had become. We were in my bathroom, Jennifer applying minimal makeup in the mirror while I ironed her blouse. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and Patricia had advised us to arrive early, prepared for Blake to pull out all stops. "Are you nervous?" I asked, carefully pressing the collar of the navy silk blouse Jennifer had chosen. She met my eyes in the mirror, her lips curved in a small, tight smile. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of Blake. Not anymore." "What then?" "Of myself," she said, setting down her mascara. "Of all the years I wasted, all the times I made excuses for him, rationalized his behavior, convinced myself that his way of loving me was normal." She turned to face me. "I was so blind, Mom. So weak." "You weren't weak," I corrected, hanging the blouse on the door hook. "You were manipulated by a master. Blake didn't just wake up one day and decide to control you. He built it slowly, brick by brick, until you were walled in so completely, you couldn't even see there was another way to live." Jennifer nodded, her eyes distant. I remember when it started, the little comments about my friends being immature, suggesting I wear different clothes because he wanted me to look my best, always phrased as concern, as wanting what was best for me. "That's how it works," I said. "Like the frog in boiling water. Turn up the heat slowly enough, and you don't realize you're being cooked alive until it's too late." She let out a harsh laugh. "God, I feel so stupid." "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't let him make you feel ashamed on top of everything else. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Jennifer was quiet for a moment, absently running her fingers over the edge of the sink. "You know what finally woke me up?" she asked. "It wasn't the control or the isolation, or even when he started getting physical. It was Lucas." "Lucas?" She nodded, her eyes filling with tears, when I started seeing Blake's behavior reflected in him. The rigid rules, the need for control, the fear of doing anything wrong. "He's 6 years old, Mom, and he was apologizing for laughing too loud because it might upset his father." She wiped her eyes carefully, mindful of her makeup. I could bear it when it was just me. I told myself it was the price of having a beautiful home, financial security, a perfect family. But when I realized Lucas was becoming collateral damage, her voice hardened. That's when something inside me finally broke free. I handed her a tissue, my own eyes damp. "You're doing the right thing, for both of you." "I know," she said, straightening her shoulders. "And Blake knows it too. That's why he's fighting so hard. He's not afraid of losing me. He's afraid of losing control." She turned back to the mirror, applying a final coat of mascara with steady hands. "But he already has. He just doesn't know it yet." The courthouse was a grand limestone building in downtown Bridgeport, imposing in its authority. Jennifer and I arrived 45 minutes early as planned, meeting Patricia in the lobby. Lucas was at day camp, shielded from the proceedings by mutual agreement. "Ready?" Patricia asked, her no-nonsense demeanor somehow reassuring in the intimidating environment. Jennifer nodded, clutching the leather portfolio containing copies of all the evidence we'd gathered. "As I'll ever be." We made our way through security and up to the third-floor courtroom, finding seats near the front. Patricia spread her documents on the table, reviewing last-minute details with Jennifer in hushed tones. I sat slightly behind them, my heart pounding with anxiety and fierce pride. At precisely 9:45, Blake arrived, flanked by 2 attorneys in expensive suits. He looked immaculate as always, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his hair expertly styled. To anyone who didn't know him, he appeared the picture of a successful, concerned father, unjustly separated from his family. His eyes locked with Jennifer's across the room, and he smiled, that practiced, charming smile that had won her over years ago. She stared back, unflinching, and something in his expression faltered for just an instant before his mask of confidence returned. He approached our table, his attorneys hanging back. "Jennifer," he said, his voice modulated to convey hurt and confusion rather than the anger I knew was simmering beneath the surface. "You look well. I've been so worried about you." Patricia stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Harrington, all communication should go through counsel." Blake ignored her, his eyes still fixed on Jennifer. "Lucas called me last night," he said. "Did you know that?" "He's confused, Jennifer. He misses his home, his toys. He misses his father." I felt a chill run through me. Lucas hadn't used any phone to call Blake. We'd been careful about that, but Jennifer didn't react, her expression remaining neutral. "Blake," she said calmly, "Lucas didn't call you. He doesn't have access to a phone, and he knows not to contact you directly right now. That's just another lie." A flash of rage crossed Blake's features before he regained control. "This isn't you talking," he said, lowering his voice to a confidential tone. "It's your mother. She's poisoned you against me, filled your head with delusions. But we can fix this, sweetheart. Just drop this nonsense and come home, for Lucas's sake." Jennifer stood up slowly, matching his height in her modest heels. "No," she said simply. "I'm exactly where I need to be, and for the first time in years I'm thinking clearly." She took a small step closer to him, her voice dropping. "I know everything, Blake. About Robert, about why you sought me out, about the accounts in the Caymans. Everything." The blood drained from Blake's face, his mask slipping completely for a moment before he recovered. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, all pretense of civility gone. "I will destroy you in court. No judge will give custody to an unstable woman with no job, no home of her own. When this is over, you'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation." Patricia stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Harrington. Return to your counsel, or I'll ask the bailiff to intervene." Blake's eyes darted between Jennifer and Patricia, calculating his options. Finally, he stepped back, straightening his tie with practiced nonchalance. "This isn't over," he said quietly, before turning on his heel and rejoining his attorneys. Jennifer sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. "He's scared," she whispered to me. "I've never seen him scared before." "Good," I replied, squeezing her shoulder. "He should be." The hearing itself was brief but intense. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, listened as both sides presented their initial arguments. Blake's attorneys painted a picture of a devoted father and husband, blindsided by his wife's sudden departure, concerned only for his son's well-being. They suggested Jennifer was mentally unstable, influenced by an interfering mother-in-law, potentially unfit to make decisions for Lucas. When Patricia's turn came, she methodically laid out the evidence of Blake's controlling behavior, the isolated bank accounts Jennifer had no access to, the monitored phone calls, the gradually increasing restrictions on her movements and relationships. She submitted affidavits from the few friends Jennifer had managed to stay in touch with, attesting to the changes they'd observed in her over the years. "Your Honor," Patricia concluded, "this is a textbook case of coercive control. Ms. Harrington is not seeking to deny Mr. Harrington access to his son. She is simply seeking safety and autonomy for herself and her child while these proceedings continue." The judge studied both parties over the rim of her glasses, her expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the submissions from both sides," she said finally. "Pending further hearings and a full custody evaluation, I'm issuing a temporary order granting primary physical custody of the minor child to Ms. Harrington, with supervised visitation for Mr. Harrington twice weekly." Blake stood abruptly. "Your Honor, that's completely unreasonable." "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," the judge interrupted sharply. "I haven't finished." She turned back to her notes. "Given the concerning allegations raised today, I'm also issuing a temporary restraining order against Mr. Harrington. He is to remain at least 100 yards from Ms. Harrington and her mother's residence except during scheduled custody exchanges, which will take place at the Family Services Center." Blake's face darkened with fury as the judge continued outlining the terms of the temporary arrangement. His attorneys whispered urgently in his ear, clearly trying to calm him, but his eyes remained fixed on Jennifer, burning with a rage I'd only glimpsed before. As we left the courtroom, Jennifer walked tall, her head high, her steps sure. It was only when we reached the privacy of Patricia's car that she allowed herself to tremble, the full weight of what had just happened crashing down on her. "He'll never forgive me for this," she whispered, staring out the window at the courthouse receding behind us. "He'll never stop." "Maybe not," I acknowledged, taking her hand. "But you've already won the most important battle. You've reclaimed yourself." That evening, after picking up Lucas from camp and celebrating with pizza and ice cream, small pleasures Blake had always restricted, Jennifer sat on the porch swing, watching Lucas chase fireflies in the twilight of my backyard. I brought out 2 glasses of iced tea and joined her, the swing creaking rhythmically beneath us. "What happens now?" I asked after a comfortable silence. Jennifer sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Lucas as he darted across the grass, mason jar in hand. "We keep fighting," she said simply, "for as long as it takes. And after that?" A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I start over, find a job, get a place of our own, maybe finish that novel I started before I met Blake." She turned to look at me. "I want Lucas to see me build a life on my own terms. I want him to know what strength really looks like." I nodded, understanding completely. "You've already shown him that, you know, every day since you walked out that door." "Not just me," Jennifer said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "He's seen it in you too. The way you never gave up on me, even when I pushed you away. The way you stood up to Blake when he threatened us. That's the kind of courage I want Lucas to inherit." We watched as Lucas triumphantly screwed the lid on his jar, having captured several of the glowing insects. He ran toward us, his face alight with the simple joy of childhood. "Mom, Grandma, look what I caught." Jennifer set down her tea and leaned forward, examining his prize with appropriate wonder. That's amazing, buddy. But remember what we talked about. We have to let them go before we come inside. They need to be free to find their families. Lucas nodded solemnly, understanding the responsibility that came with temporary captivity. He ran back to the yard, carefully unscrewing the lid and watching as the fireflies ascended into the darkening sky, their lights blinking like earthbound stars finding their way home. Beside me, Jennifer took a deep breath, as if drawing strength from the simple beauty of the moment. "I feel like those fireflies," she said quietly. "Trapped for so long I almost forgot what freedom felt like. But now you remember," I finished for her, watching as she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, lighting them from within. "Yes," she agreed. "Now I remember." And in that moment, watching my daughter rediscover her strength, I knew that no matter what battles lay ahead, she would face them not as the diminished woman Blake had tried to create, but as the person she had always been beneath the layers of fear and doubt, resilient, determined, and finally, gloriously free. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, nearly 2 months after Jennifer and Lucas had moved in with me. The return address belonged to a law firm in Manhattan I didn't recognize. I signed for it, puzzled, and brought it inside where Jennifer was working at the kitchen table on her laptop. She'd recently landed a remote position as an editorial assistant with a small publishing house, a job far below her qualifications, but a vital first step toward financial independence. "This came for you," I said, placing the envelope beside her keyboard. Jennifer looked up, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, a new addition she'd embraced without Blake's constant comments about how they made her look matronly. She examined the envelope with furrowed brows. "Hargrove, Klein & Associates," she read. "I don't know them." She slit the envelope open with a butter knife, pulling out a thick stack of legal documents and a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. As she read, her face drained of color. "Jennifer?" I asked, alarmed. "What is it?" Wordlessly, she handed me the note. The handwriting was elegant but slightly shaky, as if written by an elderly person making a concerted effort to be clear. "Dear Jennifer, my name is Margaret Caldwell. I was married to Robert Caldwell for 42 years before his passing. I believe he was your biological father, though he never had the courage to acknowledge you during his lifetime, something I found unforgivable. Robert told me about you on his deathbed, including his attempt to provide financial support, which apparently never reached you. After considerable soul-searching, I've decided to correct this wrong in my own way. The enclosed documents transfer ownership of a property in Woodbridge, Connecticut to you. It's a house that has been in my family for generations, but has stood empty for several years. Robert inherited it from my father, but never had any interest in it. I believe it rightfully belongs to you now. I also want you to know that I am fully aware of Blake's history with our family and his troubling behavior. Robert's brother James, Blake's father, was cut from the same cloth as Robert. Charming, ambitious, and deeply flawed, Blake showed concerning tendencies even as a child. When Robert learned that Blake had sought you out and married you, he was deeply disturbed, but felt he had no right to interfere after rejecting you himself for so many years. I have no desire to intrude on your life or claim any relationship that hasn't been earned. But I did want you to have what should have been yours all along, and to know that if you ever wish to contact me, my door is open. With respect and regret, Margaret Caldwell." I looked up from the letter to find Jennifer poring over the legal documents, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom," she whispered, "she's giving me a house. A whole house. It's worth nearly $2 million according to these appraisal documents." I sat heavily in the chair across from her, stunned. "Can this be real?" Jennifer nodded, still scanning the paperwork. "It seems legitimate. There's a letter here from the law firm confirming everything. They've even paid the property taxes through next year." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "This changes everything." Indeed it did. The house in Woodbridge, a stately colonial on 3 acres, according to the included photographs, represented more than just shelter. It was a pathway to complete independence from Blake, a means to provide Lucas with stability without relying on Blake's financial support, which he'd been using as leverage in the ongoing custody battle. "Should we drive by and see it?" I suggested, still processing this unexpected windfall. Jennifer hesitated. "I don't know. It feels strange, accepting something so valuable from a woman I've never met, connected to a father who never wanted me." I understood her conflicted feelings. The house represented a complicated legacy, both an inheritance and a reminder of rejection. But it also represented freedom, a resource Blake couldn't control or take away. "You don't have to decide right now," I assured her. "The house isn't going anywhere." Jennifer nodded, carefully returning the documents to the envelope. "I need to talk to Patricia about this. Make sure accepting it won't complicate the divorce or custody arrangements." Later that evening, after Lucas was in bed, Jennifer and I sat on the porch swing, watching as summer lightning flickered on the horizon. A storm was coming, but still distant, painting the sky with brief, brilliant illuminations. "I spoke with Patricia," Jennifer said, breaking our comfortable silence. "She says accepting the house won't impact the divorce proceedings. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, and gifts or inheritances received after separation aren't considered marital property." "That's good news," I said, pushing the swing gently with my foot. "There's more," Jennifer continued, her voice taking on a strange quality, part wonder, part grim satisfaction. "Patricia did some digging into Margaret Caldwell. She's not just Robert's widow. She's the majority shareholder in Caldwell Financial Group." The name was familiar. "Isn't that the parent company of Blake's investment firm?" Jennifer confirmed. "Blake's entire career has been built within his uncle's company, working under the woman who just gave me a $2 million house." The implications were staggering. Margaret Caldwell wasn't just offering Jennifer a house. She was handing her a form of leverage over Blake that he would never have anticipated. "Do you think she knows about the divorce, the custody battle?" I asked. Jennifer nodded slowly. "Patricia thinks she must. These types of proceedings aren't technically public, but in financial circles word gets around, and her letter mentioned being aware of Blake's troubling behavior." The next morning, Jennifer called the law firm representing Margaret Caldwell and arranged for us to tour the house. Lucas was at his day camp, giving us the freedom to explore without having to explain the complex situation to him. The Woodbridge property exceeded even the impressive photos. Set back from the road down a winding driveway lined with ancient maples, the white colonial with black shutters looked like something from a New England postcard. It needed some updating inside. The kitchen was straight out of the 1980s, and the wallpaper in several rooms had seen better days. But the bones of the house were impeccable. Hardwood floors throughout, 6 bedrooms, a sunroom overlooking a small pond, and even a detached guest house that had once been a caretaker's cottage. As we walked through the rooms, I watched Jennifer's face carefully. At first, she moved almost reluctantly, as if afraid to connect with the space. But gradually, her natural eye for design and detail took over. She ran her hands along the solid oak banister, peered out multi-paned windows at the expansive yard, tested the squeaky 3rd step on the main staircase. "Lucas would love that oak tree," she said finally, pointing to a massive tree with low-hanging branches perfect for climbing. "And there's space for a real vegetable garden here. He's been begging to grow pumpkins ever since he read that book about the giant pumpkin." I smiled, recognizing the shift in her thinking. She was beginning to imagine a life here, to see possibilities rather than complications. "It needs work," she acknowledged, "but nothing that can't be fixed over time. And it's only 15 minutes from Lucas's potential new school." We left with the keys in Jennifer's possession, the property officially hers as of that morning, according to the law firm's representative. On the drive home, she was quiet, lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" I asked eventually. "I'm thinking about Margaret Caldwell," she replied. "About why she did this. Is it guilt, atonement for Robert's rejection, or something else? Does it matter?" I asked gently. Jennifer considered this. "Maybe not, but I think I need to meet her, to understand, and to thank her, regardless of her motives." 2 days later, Jennifer had an appointment with Margaret Caldwell at the older woman's penthouse apartment in Manhattan. I stayed home with Lucas, nervous energy keeping me cleaning and reorganizing cabinets until my arthritic hands protested. When Jennifer returned late that afternoon, her expression was unreadable as she hung her car keys on the hook by the door. "How did it go?" I asked, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. Jennifer sank into the armchair across from me. "She's not what I expected." "In what way?" "She's formidable," Jennifer said after a moment's consideration. 82 years old and sharp as a tack. No nonsense. I can see why she's still on the board of directors at Caldwell Financial. She pulled a small velvet box from her purse. "She gave me this, said it belonged to her mother, and that she had no daughters of her own to pass it to." Inside the box was an antique emerald ring, the deep green stone set in intricate platinum filigree. It was clearly valuable, but the monetary worth seemed secondary to the symbolic gesture. Margaret publicly acknowledging Jennifer as family. But that's not the most important thing she gave me, Jennifer continued, closing the ring box carefully. She gave me information. About Blake, about the company, about the family dynamics I married into without realizing it. What kind of information? Blake has been embezzling from the company, Jennifer said bluntly. Small amounts over years, carefully hidden in overseas accounts. Margaret has known for some time but kept it quiet to avoid a scandal. Apparently, it's a pattern with the men in that family. Robert did something similar in his younger days before Margaret caught him and put a stop to it. I sat forward, alarmed. Does Blake know she's aware of this? Jennifer shook her head. No, and that's part of the leverage she's offering me. She took a deep breath. Margaret has proposed a deal. If I agree not to publicly expose Blake's financial misconduct, which could trigger investigations, bad press for the company, etc., she'll ensure that he accepts a fair divorce settlement and reasonable custody arrangement. If he doesn't agree to her terms, she'll not only fire him but press charges. The breathtaking simplicity and effectiveness of the plan left me momentarily speechless. Margaret Caldwell had offered Jennifer a way to end the battle quickly, without the extended court proceedings and ugly tactics Blake had been employing. Do you trust her? I finally asked. Jennifer considered the question carefully. Strangely, yes. Not because she has any particular affection for me. I think she's too practical for sentimentality. But because it serves her interests as well. She wants to protect the company reputation, maintain control, and maybe, in some small way, atone for Robert's abandonment. And how do you feel about using this leverage? About essentially blackmailing Blake? Jennifer's expression hardened. After everything he's done, the manipulation, the isolation, the emotional abuse, after the way he's tried to use Lucas as a weapon against me, she shook her head firmly. I have no qualms whatsoever. He created this situation, not me. The following week moved with breathtaking speed. Margaret's lawyers contacted Blake directly, presenting him with irrefutable evidence of his financial misconduct and a clear choice. Agree to Margaret and Jennifer's terms, or face termination, legal action, and public exposure. Blake capitulated with a speed that would have been almost amusing if the stakes hadn't been so high. The preliminary agreement, drafted by Patricia and approved by Margaret's legal team, granted Jennifer primary custody of Lucas, with Blake receiving every other weekend visitation and one dinner visit per week. The house in Westport would be sold, with the proceeds split equally. Blake would pay reasonable child support based on his income, but would have no claim on the Woodbridge property, or any assets Jennifer acquired post-separation. When Patricia called with the news that Blake had signed the agreement, Jennifer stood motionless in my kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming silently down her face. When she hung up, she didn't speak, just opened her arms, and I stepped into them, holding my daughter as her body shook with the release of months, years, of tension and fear. It's over, she whispered against my shoulder. He's really letting go, because he has no choice, I reminded her gently. Don't mistake this for a change of heart. Jennifer pulled back, wiping her eyes. I know exactly what it is. Self-preservation. The only thing Blake has ever truly cared about. Himself. A small, fierce smile played at the corners of her mouth. But I don't care why he's doing it. All that matters is that Lucas and I are free. That weekend, we took Lucas to see the house in Woodbridge. We'd prepared him carefully, explaining that this would be their new home, a fresh start for him and his mom. At 6 years old, his main concerns were practical and immediate. Will I still go to the same school? He asked as we turned onto the maple-lined driveway. No, buddy, Jennifer explained. You'll go to a new school with new friends, but it's a great school with an amazing science program and a big playground. What about Daddy? Lucas asked, his voice smaller. Jennifer met my eyes briefly in the rearview mirror before answering. You'll still see Daddy regularly. He'll visit you for dinner once a week, and you'll stay with him every other weekend, and you can talk to him on the phone whenever you want. Lucas processed this information with the solemnity children sometimes bring to major life changes. Okay, he said finally. But can I have a blue room? Daddy said blue was a baby color, but I still like it. Jennifer's hands tightened on the steering wheel for just a moment before she relaxed them deliberately. You can have any color room you want, Lucas. Any color at all. As we pulled up in front of the house, Lucas's eyes widened with childish wonder. "We're going to live here?" he exclaimed. "It looks like a castle." Jennifer laughed, a free, unguarded sound I hadn't heard from her in years. "Not quite a castle, but yes, this is going to be our home." We spent the afternoon exploring the property, Lucas racing from room to room, his excitement growing with each discovery. The window seat in what would be his bedroom, the hidden closet under the stairs, the pond, with tiny frogs he could catch and release. As Lucas investigated the backyard, Jennifer and I stood on the wide back porch, watching him dart between trees, his energy boundless. "I never thought I'd have this," Jennifer said quietly. "A home that's truly mine. Safety, freedom." She turned to look at me, her eyes clear and determined. "I won't waste it, Mom. I promise you that." "I know you won't," I assured her, slipping my arm around her waist. "I've been thinking about that letter," she continued. "The one you kept all these years, explaining about Robert, about how Thomas chose to be my father even though he didn't have to be." She watched Lucas attempt to climb the massive oak tree, her expression softening. "That's what real fatherhood is, isn't it? A choice. A daily decision to love and protect and nurture." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "That's exactly what it is. Blake never made that choice," she said, her voice steady. "He wanted ownership, not fatherhood. Control, not connection." She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Lucas deserves better, and somehow I'm going to make sure he gets it, even if Blake never changes." As the golden late afternoon light bathed the property, painting everything in warm hues of possibility, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for decades. The truth, all of it, was finally out in the open. The secrets that had weighed on me for so long had been transformed from burdens into sources of power, tools for Jennifer to reclaim her life and protect her son. And in that transformation, I glimpsed the legacy Thomas would have been proudest of. Not the truth of biology or blood, but the inheritance of courage, resilience, and unwavering love that had passed from him to Jennifer, and now to Lucas. Some inheritances can't be measured in houses or bank accounts or emerald rings. Some powers can't be taken away by controlling men or legal maneuvers or years of careful manipulation. The power Jennifer had rediscovered within herself, the power that had been there all along, waiting for her to reclaim it, that was the true revelation, the secret treasure that would sustain her long after the legal battles faded into memory. And watching her stand tall in the fading sunlight, planning renovations and imagining new beginnings, I knew that power would never be hidden again. Autumn arrived with a vengeance that year, as if making up for the languid summer. Crimson and gold leaves carpeted the grounds of the Woodbridge house, which Jennifer had officially moved into at the beginning of October. Lucas started at his new school, a small private academy with an emphasis on creative thinking and individual learning styles, funded by a scholarship program Margaret Caldwell had quietly arranged. I remained in my Brookfield home, though I spent weekends in Woodbridge helping Jennifer settle in. The house was gradually transforming under her care. Walls repainted in warm, welcoming colors, outdated fixtures replaced, furniture carefully selected for comfort, rather than the rigid formality Blake had always insisted upon. Each change, however small, represented another step in Jennifer's reclamation of her identity and autonomy. The divorce was proceeding smoothly, thanks to Margaret's behind-the-scenes pressure on Blake. The custody arrangement had been formalized, with Lucas spending most of his time with Jennifer, but seeing Blake regularly for dinner visits and alternate weekends. On the surface, everything seemed to be falling into place, but I couldn't shake a lingering uneasiness, a mother's intuition that the calm was temporary. Blake had surrendered too easily, accepted his defeat with a compliance that contradicted everything I knew about his character. My concerns crystallized into reality on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late October. I was at home in Brookfield, updating lesson plans for the literacy tutoring I'd recently started at the local library, when my phone rang. It was Patricia Reeves, Jennifer's attorney. "Eleanor," she said without preamble, her normally composed voice tight with tension. "Have you spoken with Jennifer today?" "Not since this morning," I replied, immediately alert. "Why? What's happened?" There was a brief pause. "Blake filed an emergency motion with the family court yesterday. He's alleging that Jennifer is mentally unstable and potentially a danger to Lucas." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "That's absurd," I said, my voice rising. Jennifer is doing better than she has in years. Lucas is thriving. I know, Patricia said grimly. But Blake has submitted evidence. Recordings of Jennifer supposedly having emotional outbursts, documentation of alleged prescription drug abuse, even a psychiatric evaluation claiming she has borderline personality disorder. That's impossible, I protested. Jennifer isn't taking any medication except occasional ibuprofen, and she hasn't seen a psychiatrist. Exactly, Patricia agreed. It's all fabricated. The problem is, he's managed to find a psychiatrist willing to diagnose her without ever meeting her, based solely on Blake's descriptions of her behavior. And the judge who got the emergency petition isn't the same one who handled our earlier hearings. This one has a history of being conservative when it comes to maternal mental health issues. My heart pounded against my ribs. What does this mean for Jennifer? For Lucas? Blake is asking for immediate temporary custody while Jennifer undergoes a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. There's an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Have you told Jennifer? I tried calling, but she's not answering. I thought she might be with you. Cold dread settled in my stomach. I'll go to Woodbridge right now. She should be home. She works remotely on Tuesdays. Call me as soon as you reach her, Patricia instructed. I need to prep her for tomorrow. This is going to get ugly, but we can fight it if we're prepared. The drive to Woodbridge normally took 25 minutes. I made it in 18, rain lashing against my windshield as I navigated the winding back roads with grim determination. Jennifer's silver Volvo, a practical replacement for the luxury SUV she'd left behind in Westport, was parked in the circular driveway when I arrived, alongside a black sedan I didn't recognize. I parked hastily and hurried to the front door, rain soaking through my light jacket. When no one answered my knock, I used my key to let myself in. Jennifer? I called, stepping into the foyer. Are you home? The house was eerily quiet, except for the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. I moved through the first floor, checking the kitchen, living room, and sunroom before heading upstairs, an inexplicable sense of foreboding growing with each empty room I found. Jennifer? I called again, louder this time. A noise from the master bedroom at the end of the hall drew my attention. A soft thud, followed by muffled voices. I approached cautiously, pushing the half-open door wider. Jennifer was standing by the window, her back to me, facing a slight woman with short gray hair whom I recognized after a moment as Margaret Caldwell. Both turned at my entrance, and I was startled by the intensity in Jennifer's eyes. Not fear or distress, but a cold, focused anger I'd never seen before. "Mom," she said, her voice controlled despite the emotion evident on her face. "I'm glad you're here. Margaret was just filling me in on Blake's latest maneuver." Margaret Caldwell nodded at me in greeting, her posture as rigid and dignified as it had been in the single photograph I'd seen of her. "Mrs. Mitchell," she acknowledged. I took the liberty of coming directly to Jennifer when I learned what Blake was attempting. I have certain resources that might prove useful in this situation. I moved to Jennifer's side, taking in the papers spread across the bed, legal documents, what appeared to be bank statements, and several manila folders with names I didn't recognize. "Patricia called me," I explained. "She's been trying to reach you." "My phone's been off," Jennifer admitted. "I've been busy." She gestured to the documents. Preparing for what?" I asked. Jennifer and Margaret exchanged a look laden with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. It was Margaret who answered. "For the counter move," she said simply. "Blake has overplayed his hand, and now he's going to learn why that was a mistake." Jennifer gathered several papers from the bed, handing them to me. "These are statements from the private investigator Margaret hired after our first meeting. She's been having Blake followed for months." I scanned the documents, my eyes widening as I absorbed their contents. Detailed reports of Blake meeting with a young woman in various hotels around Connecticut and New York. Photographs of him entering and exiting these establishments. Timestamp evidence establishing a pattern of infidelity that predated his separation from Jennifer by several years. "This is thorough," I said, looking up at Margaret with newfound respect. "I don't leave things to chance," the older woman replied, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "When I learned about Blake's character, I wanted insurance. I've dealt with too many men like him, men who believe the rules don't apply to them, who think they can always find another angle, another leverage point. But how does this help with his custody grab?" I asked. "Infidelity doesn't necessarily impact parenting rights." Jennifer took the papers back, tucking them into a folder. "That's just the beginning," she said. The investigator also documented Blake drinking heavily before picking up Lucas for visits, arguing on his phone while driving with Lucas in the car, leaving Lucas with various babysitters during what was supposed to be his parenting time so he could meet his companion. "And there's more," Margaret added, tapping another folder. "Financial misconduct that goes beyond what I initially discovered. Blake hasn't just been embezzling from Caldwell Financial. He's been laundering money for some rather unsavory clients, the kind of clients that trigger federal investigations." I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process the scope of what they were telling me. "You're going to blackmail him? Again?" "Not blackmail," Jennifer corrected, her voice hardening. "Accountability. Blake thinks he can fabricate evidence to paint me as unstable and dangerous. He's willing to perjure himself, to pay for false psychiatric evaluations, all to maintain control. I'm not going to let him get away with it." "What exactly are you planning?" I asked, concern threading through my voice. The determined woman before me was so different from the cowed, uncertain Jennifer of just a few months ago. Her transformation was empowering, but also slightly alarming in its intensity. Jennifer began gathering the documents, organizing them methodically into separate folders. "First, Patricia will present evidence at tomorrow's hearing countering Blake's claims. Medical records showing I'm not on any psychiatric medications. Statements from Lucas's teachers about how well-adjusted and happy he's been since the move. My employer's assessment of my work performance, which has been exemplary. Standard legal defense," Margaret commented. "Important, but unlikely to be enough on its own. Blake's chosen his strategy carefully. Mental health allegations are notoriously difficult to disprove, especially when there's a sympathetic judge involved. Which is why we have Plan B," Jennifer continued. "If the judge seems inclined to grant Blake's motion, Patricia will request a brief recess. During that time, Blake will receive a phone call from his attorney, who will have just been contacted by Margaret's lawyers with copies of everything in these folders." She patted the stack of documents. "He'll be given a choice: withdraw his motion voluntarily, agree to a modified custody arrangement that reduces his time with Lucas to supervised visits only, or face exposure on multiple fronts, to his girlfriend's husband, to federal regulators, to the police regarding his drinking and driving with Lucas in the car." I looked between the two women, struck by their similar expressions of cool determination, despite their vastly different backgrounds and experiences. "And you think he'll back down?" "Blake is a bully," Jennifer said flatly. "And like most bullies, he's a coward at heart. He doesn't actually want custody of Lucas. He wants to hurt me, to maintain control. When he realizes the cost will be his reputation, his freedom, possibly even his liberty, he'll fold." Margaret nodded in agreement. "Men like Blake calculate risk versus reward. When the risk becomes too high, they retreat. I've seen it countless times in business. The key is making the risk unambiguous and immediate. And if he doesn't back down?" I pressed, unable to shake my concern. "If he calls your bluff?" "It's not a bluff," Margaret said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Every document in these folders has been verified by my legal team. If Blake forces our hand, he will face consequences far beyond a custody dispute." Jennifer came to sit beside me on the bed, taking my hands in hers. "Mom, I know this seems extreme, but Blake left me no choice. He's willing to use Lucas as a weapon, to lie under oath, to destroy my reputation and possibly my relationship with my son. I have to be equally committed to stopping him." I squeezed her hands, seeing in her eyes not vindictiveness, but the fierce protective instinct of a mother determined to shield her child. "I understand," I assured her. "I just don't want you to become like him in the process of fighting him." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "I won't. That's why I'm not doing any of this publicly. I'm not trying to destroy him out of revenge. I just want him to leave us alone, to give Lucas and me the chance to build a healthy life." She glanced at Margaret. "Besides, I have good advisors keeping me grounded." Margaret acknowledged this with a slight nod, her expression inscrutable. Later, after Margaret had departed and Jennifer had finally called Patricia to strategize for the hearing, we sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Lucas was at a sleepover with a new school friend, a blessing given the current circumstances, and the house felt unnaturally quiet, the rain still pattering steadily against the windows. "How did you become so formidable so quickly?" I asked. studying my daughter across the steam rising from my cup. 6 months ago, you were afraid to disagree with Blake about dinner plans. Now you're orchestrating a multi-layered legal counterattack like some kind of chess master. Jennifer's lips curved in a small smile. I've always been this person, Mom. I just forgot for a while. She traced the rim of her mug thoughtfully. Blake didn't take my strength all at once. He chipped away at it bit by bit, day by day, until I couldn't remember what it felt like to trust my own judgment. But it was still there, buried under all that doubt and fear. And now? I prompted. Now I remember who I am, she said simply. Who you and Dad raised me to be. Someone who doesn't back down when it matters, who protects what she loves, who doesn't let bullies win. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. I learned that from you, you know. Watching you stand up to Blake that day in your living room, putting yourself between him and me even though he towered over you. That image stayed with me. It gave me strength on the days I wanted to give up. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I was terrified that day, I admitted, but more terrified of what would happen if I didn't stand my ground. That's what courage is, isn't it? Jennifer mused. Not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. She straightened in her chair, a newfound resolve evident in her posture. And tomorrow we're going to show Blake what real courage looks like. Not his brand of bullying and intimidation, but the quiet strength that comes from standing in your truth, no matter the cost. I squeezed her hand, pride swelling in my chest. He won't know what hit him. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the rain having washed away the humidity, leaving behind a brilliant blue October sky. Jennifer dressed with careful deliberation for the emergency hearing. A modest navy blue dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the picture of stable, responsible motherhood. Patricia met us at the courthouse steps, her briefcase bulging with the documentation we'd prepared late into the previous night. Margaret's driver had delivered a sealed envelope to her earlier that morning. The insurance policy, as Jennifer called it, to be used only if absolutely necessary. Are you ready? Patricia asked Jennifer as we climbed the courthouse steps. Jennifer nodded, her expression calm but determined. More than ready. Blake and his attorney were already seated in the courtroom when we entered, his handsome face arranged in an expression of somber concern that might have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. He glanced up as we approached, a flicker of something, surprise, uncertainty, crossing his features when he registered Jennifer's composed demeanor. He'd expected her to be a nervous wreck, I realized. Had counted on it, even. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence to her seat beside Patricia, arranging her notes methodically, never once acknowledging his presence. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s named Judge Hartley, entered the courtroom and the proceedings began. Blake's attorney presented first, painting a picture of Jennifer as unstable, erratic, possibly suffering from untreated mental illness that put Lucas at risk. He presented the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, recordings of what he claimed were Jennifer's emotional outbursts, which, when played, were merely Jennifer speaking firmly to Blake about respecting boundaries, and statements from concerned parties who had observed Jennifer's supposed instability. Throughout it all, Jennifer remained utterly still, her expression neutral, her eyes never leaving the judge's face. Only the slight whitening of her knuckles as she gripped her pen betrayed her inner tension. When Patricia's turn came, she methodically dismantled each of Blake's claims. She presented Jennifer's recent medical records showing no psychiatric medications or diagnoses, letters from Lucas's teachers describing his improved demeanor and academic performance since moving to Woodbridge, a statement from Jennifer's employer praising her reliability and professional competence. Furthermore, Your Honor, Patricia continued, we have reason to believe that Mr. Harrington's psychiatric expert has never actually met or evaluated my client. We request that the court verify the credentials and methodology of this supposed evaluation before giving it any weight whatsoever. Judge Hartley frowned, reviewing the documents before her. Mr. Ellison, she addressed Blake's attorney, can you confirm that your expert has personally examined Ms. Harrington? Blake's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, Dr. Winters conducted his evaluation based on extensive case notes and recordings provided by my client, given Ms. Harrington's refusal to cooperate. So that's a no, the judge interrupted dryly. He has not personally examined her. Your Honor, in cases where one party refuses evaluation, Ms. Harrington has refused no such evaluation because none was officially ordered, Patricia interjected. Mr. Harrington took it upon himself to seek out an opinion that would support his narrative, without any attempt to involve my client in the process. A muscle twitched in Blake's jaw as the judge's scrutiny turned more skeptical. He leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, who nodded slightly before addressing the court again. Your Honor, regardless of the evaluation process, we have documented evidence of Ms. Harrington's erratic behavior and emotional instability. The recordings which show my client calmly but firmly establishing boundaries with a man who has a documented history of controlling behavior, Patricia countered. Context matters, Your Honor. Judge Hartley held up a hand to silence both attorneys. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, and I'm not seeing sufficient cause for an emergency modification of custody. She turned a stern gaze toward Blake's attorney. Mr. Ellison, the court takes allegations of parental mental instability extremely seriously, but such claims require substantive, credible evidence, not selective recordings and an evaluation conducted without the subject's knowledge or participation. Relief washed over me as the judge continued, her tone growing increasingly disapproving. This appears to be, at best, a misguided attempt to express genuine concern, and at worst, a deliberate effort to manipulate the court and deprive a fit parent of custody without just cause. Neither is acceptable. Blake's face had gone rigid, his eyes cold with fury as the judge dismantled his case. His attorney made several more attempts to salvage their position, but Judge Hartley remained unmoved. The emergency petition is denied, she declared finally. The existing custody arrangement will remain in place. Mr. Harrington, if you have ongoing concerns about Ms. Harrington's fitness as a parent, I suggest you address them through proper channels, including court-appointed evaluators and mediators, rather than seeking emergency relief based on questionable evidence. As we gathered our belongings to leave, Blake approached, his attorney unsuccessfully attempting to hold him back with a cautioning hand on his arm. This isn't over, he hissed, his voice low enough that only Jennifer and I could hear. You think you've won? I'm just getting started. By the time I'm done with you, Mr. Harrington, Patricia interrupted smoothly, stepping between us. I would strongly advise against making statements that could be construed as threats. The judge is still in the building, and I'm sure she'd be interested to hear them. Blake's gaze shifted to something over Patricia's shoulder, and his expression changed subtly. I turned to see Margaret Caldwell entering the courtroom, her elegant figure commanding attention despite her age. She approached our group with measured steps, stopping just short of Blake. Blake, she acknowledged coolly. I thought I might find you here. His face paled slightly. Margaret, I didn't realize you had an interest in family court proceedings. I have an interest in many things, she replied, her voice pleasant but with an unmistakable edge, including the welfare of Jennifer and Lucas and the reputation of the Caldwell name, which you seem determined to tarnish through your misguided actions. Blake's attorney looked between them, confusion evident on his face. Mr. Harrington, who is this? Margaret Caldwell, she supplied before Blake could answer. Majority shareholder of Caldwell Financial Group and Blake's effective employer. She smiled thinly, though perhaps not for much longer, depending on certain decisions made in the very near future. The color drained completely from Blake's face, understanding dawning in his eyes. You wouldn't, he said, his voice barely audible. I've prepared a car to take you to my office, Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken. I think we need to discuss several matters urgently, including your continued employment, certain financial irregularities that have come to my attention, and your apparent willingness to perjure yourself in court today. She glanced at Jennifer. Unless, of course, you'd prefer that Jennifer share what she knows with the authorities directly. I believe that's still an option on the table. The silent standoff lasted only moments, but it felt like hours. Finally, Blake's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, defeat written in every line of his body. We'll continue this another time, he told his confused attorney, his voice flat. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I have an unavoidable meeting to attend. As Blake followed Margaret from the courtroom, he turned back once, his gaze locking with Jennifer's. In that moment, I saw something I'd never witnessed in him before. Fear. Not rage, not calculation, but genuine fear. Jennifer met his gaze steadily, making no attempt to hide her triumph or her resolve. Without a word, she conveyed what Blake must have finally understood. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The woman he'd controlled for years had not only escaped his influence, but had become a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Outside the courthouse, as we walked to our cars, I slipped my arm through Jennifer's. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, looking up at the brilliant blue sky as if seeing it for the first time. "Yes," she said, a smile spreading slowly across her face. "For the first time in years, I think I really am." Patricia approached with her briefcase, looking both relieved and impressed. "That was remarkably smooth," she commented. "I've rarely seen a judge shut down an emergency petition so decisively." She glanced in the direction Margaret and Blake had gone. "And I've definitely never seen a client with quite such influential allies." Jennifer's smile turned slightly wry. Margaret isn't exactly an ally in the traditional sense. She has her own agenda. But today, our interests aligned perfectly. "And tomorrow?" I asked, unable to keep the concern from my voice. "Tomorrow," Jennifer said, unlocking her car. "We continue building our new life, one day at a time, with no more looking over our shoulders." She turned to me, her expression softening. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? Lucas will want to tell you all about his sleepover, and I thought we might look at paint samples for the sunroom. I'm thinking maybe yellow, something warm and bright." As simple as the invitation was, it represented everything she'd fought for. The freedom to make her own choices, to create a home on her terms, to raise her son in an atmosphere of joy rather than fear. It was, in its way, the most profound victory of all. "Yellow sounds perfect," I said, my heart full. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Winter descended early that year, blanketing Woodbridge in snow by mid-November. The holidays approached with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This would be the first Thanksgiving and Christmas since Jennifer and Lucas had left Blake, the first opportunity to create new traditions untethered from his controlling influence. But it also meant navigating the complicated logistics of shared custody during a season centered around family togetherness. In the weeks following the failed emergency hearing, Blake had been uncharacteristically subdued. Whatever transpired during his meeting with Margaret Caldwell had evidently made an impact. He adhered strictly to the custody schedule, returning Lucas promptly after visits, making no further legal challenges. On the surface, it seemed he had finally accepted the new reality. But I remained wary. Men like Blake don't change their fundamental nature overnight, and his compliance felt less like genuine acceptance and more like a strategic retreat, a temporary concession, while he regrouped and planned his next move. My concerns deepened the week before Thanksgiving when Jennifer called me, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Lucas just told me something disturbing," she said without preamble. "During his weekend with Blake told him that I'm sick in the head, and that's why the judge wouldn't listen to him in court. He said I've been lying to everyone, including you and Lucas, and that eventually he'll prove it and bring Lucas home where he belongs." My hand tightened around the phone. "He said this directly to Lucas?" "Yes, while they were playing chess." Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. Lucas was confused and upset. "He asked me if I'm really sick, if I've been lying to him. Mom, Blake is poisoning my son against me, using the exact same accusations he tried in court." "What did you tell Lucas?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "Some conversations needed to happen in person. The truth," Jennifer replied, "that his dad is angry about our separation and saying hurtful things that aren't true, that I'm not sick, and I've never lied to him about anything important." She sighed heavily. "But he's 6 years old, Mom. How is he supposed to know who to believe when his father tells him one thing and I tell him another?" "I'm coming over," I said, already heading for the door. An hour later, we sat at Jennifer's kitchen island while Lucas played in the family room, within sight, but out of earshot. Jennifer had redecorated the kitchen since my last visit, replacing the dated cabinets with warm cherry wood and the old linoleum with terracotta tiles. Like every space she'd reclaimed in the house, it reflected her emerging style. Warm, welcoming, and utterly unlike the cold showroom perfection Blake had insisted upon in their Westport home. "I've been consulting with Patricia about this," Jennifer said, sliding a mug of tea across the counter to me. "It's called parental alienation, when one parent systematically tries to destroy a child's relationship with the other parent. It's a form of emotional abuse, but it's hard to prove, and even harder to stop. Can't you limit his access to Lucas until he stops this behavior?" I asked. Jennifer shook her head grimly. Not without going back to court, which means putting Lucas through more trauma, more questioning, more confusion. And even then, the burden of proof would be on me. It would be Blake's word against mine, and he's very good at presenting himself as the reasonable, concerned parent when authorities are watching. I glanced toward the family room, where Lucas was building an elaborate fortress with his blocks, his small face furrowed in concentration. So, what can you do? Patricia suggested documentation, keeping a journal of everything Lucas reports after visits, any behavioral changes, any concerning statements Blake makes. If a pattern emerges, we might have grounds for a custody modification. She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in the gesture. But that's a long-term solution. It doesn't help Lucas now, today, when he's trying to understand why the two people who should love him most are saying such contradictory things about each other. I reached across the counter to squeeze her hand. You've always been honest with him. That counts for a lot, even at his age. Kids are remarkably perceptive. They can sense authenticity. I hope so, Jennifer said, her gaze drifting to Lucas. Because right now, honesty is all I've got. The situation deteriorated further the following week. Lucas returned from his Wednesday dinner visit with Blake, withdrawn and moody, refusing to talk about what was bothering him. When Jennifer finally coaxed it out of him, she learned that Blake had shown Lucas photos of their old house in Westport, telling him that his room was still waiting for him, exactly as he'd left it, for when he came home for good. He told Lucas that this is just temporary. Jennifer recounted to me over the phone, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. That once the courts understand what's really going on, Lucas will live with him full-time and see me only occasionally, if I get the help I need. That's psychological warfare, I said, appalled. He's using Lucas as a pawn to hurt you. And it's working, Jennifer admitted, her voice breaking. Lucas is so confused. He asked me if he's going to have to leave here soon. He wanted to know if he should pack his favorite toys now so he doesn't forget them when it's time to go back to Daddy's house. Jennifer, this has to stop, I insisted. You need to talk to Patricia again. There must be something you can do legally to protect Lucas from this manipulation. I'm meeting with her tomorrow, Jennifer assured me. But in the meantime, I've made another decision. I'm calling Margaret Caldwell. This constant undermining, this emotional abuse of Lucas, it violates the understanding we had with Blake. If Margaret still has leverage over him, now's the time to use it. The confrontation, when it came, happened sooner than any of us expected. The following evening was Thanksgiving, and Jennifer had invited me to join her and Lucas for dinner at the Woodbridge house. We'd spent the morning cooking together, Jennifer teaching Lucas how to roll out pie dough while I prepared the turkey, the kitchen filled with laughter and the comforting scents of sage and cinnamon. It was the kind of holiday I'd dreamed of for years, my daughter and grandson free from Blake's critical oversight, able to enjoy the simple pleasure of making a mess in the kitchen without fear of rebuke. Lucas had flour in his hair and a streak of pumpkin filling on his cheek, his earlier distress temporarily forgotten in the joy of creating something with his mother. We were just setting the table, the turkey resting on the counter, when the doorbell rang. Jennifer froze, a handful of silverware suspended midair. Are you expecting someone? I asked, alarmed by the sudden tension in her posture. She shook her head, setting down the silverware carefully. No one. Mommy, is that Daddy? Lucas asked, perking up. You said he was going to his friend's house for Thanksgiving. That's what he told me, Jennifer replied, her voice carefully neutral. Stay here with Grandma while I see who it is, okay? I drew Lucas close to my side as Jennifer moved toward the front door, every line of her body alert. Through the dining room window, I could see a familiar black sedan parked in the driveway. Blake's car. Jennifer opened the door only part way, blocking the entrance with her body. Blake? I heard her say, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet house. This isn't your scheduled time with Lucas. We didn't agree to a Thanksgiving visit. I know, Blake's voice replied, the charm in it setting my teeth on edge even from a distance. But it's Thanksgiving, Jennifer. I couldn't stand the thought of Lucas spending it without his father. I brought him a present. There was a rustling sound, presumably Blake showing her whatever gift he'd brought. Just a quick visit. 20 minutes. You can't deny me that on a holiday. Lucas squirmed in my grip, trying to see around the corner to the foyer. "Is it Daddy? I want to see." "Let's wait until Mom says it's okay," I murmured, holding him gently but firmly at my side. Something in Blake's unannounced appearance set alarm bells ringing in my mind. This wasn't a spontaneous holiday visit. It was calculated, designed to disrupt the new traditions Jennifer was trying to establish, to remind Lucas and Jennifer that Blake could insert himself into their lives whenever he chose. "Blake, you know the agreement," Jennifer was saying, her voice firmer now. "You have Lucas this weekend. We can arrange for you to do a special Thanksgiving meal with him then." "That's not the same, and you know it," Blake countered, his tone hardening slightly. "Let me see my son, Jennifer. Don't make this difficult." There was a brief silence. Then Jennifer's voice again, lower but clear enough for me to hear. "You're doing this deliberately, aren't you? Showing up unannounced, trying to disrupt our holiday. Just like you've been feeding Lucas lies about me, about our situation. It stops now, Blake. All of it." "I don't know what Lucas has been telling you," Blake replied smoothly. "But children often misinterpret adult conversations. If he's confused about something I've said, cut the act," Jennifer interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "We both know exactly what you've been doing. The court may not be able to prove parental alienation without extensive evidence, but I know, and I'm not going to let you use our son as a weapon anymore." "Jennifer," Blake's voice dropped to a dangerous register I recognized all too well. "Open the door and let me see Lucas. Now, or I promise you'll regret it." Lucas had gone still beside me, his earlier excitement fading as he picked up on the tension in the adults' voices. "Why is Daddy mad?" he whispered, looking up at me with worried eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," I assured him, though my own heart was racing. "Your mom and dad are just talking about grown-up things." Through the sliver of the foyer visible from our position, I saw Jennifer straighten her shoulders, a gesture of resolve I'd come to recognize in recent months. "No, Blake," she said clearly. "You're not coming in today. You'll see Lucas this weekend as scheduled. If you have a problem with that, you can contact Patricia." "You bitch," Blake snarled, all pretense of civility vanishing. "You think you've won? You think this little power play of yours changes anything? I will take him from you. I will make sure he knows exactly what kind of woman his mother really is. When I'm done, when you're done, you'll have violated the terms of our agreement with Margaret Caldwell," Jennifer cut in, her voice steady despite the venom in his. "An agreement that's keeping you out of legal trouble, employed, and with access to your son. Is that really a risk you want to take?" There was a moment of tense silence before Blake spoke again, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing without her backing you. Nothing without your mother holding your hand. The pathetic, unwanted daughter that nobody ever really loved. Not Robert, not me, and eventually, not Lucas either." I felt a rush of white-hot anger at his cruel words, at the deliberate attempt to inflict pain on the wounds he knew were still healing. Lucas tugged at my sleeve, his face crumpled with confusion and distress. "Grandma, why is Daddy saying mean things to Mom?" he whispered. Before I could formulate an answer appropriate for 6-year-old ears, the confrontation at the door escalated. There was a sound of impact, Blake pushing against the door Jennifer was still blocking, and then Jennifer's voice, steely with determination. "Leave now, Blake, or I'm calling the police. This is trespassing." "Call them," he challenged. "I'll tell them I was concerned for my son's welfare, that his mentally unstable mother is keeping him from his father on a major holiday. Let's see how that plays out in the custody evaluation." Another silence, and then the sound of Jennifer reaching for something. Her phone, I assumed, but what she said next surprised me. "I'm not calling the police, Blake. I'm calling Margaret, and then I'm calling the federal authorities about your creative accounting for certain overseas clients. How do you think that will play out in your professional evaluation?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. When Blake finally spoke again, his voice had changed, the rage submerged beneath a veneer of calculation. "This isn't over, Jennifer. Not by a long shot. You've made a powerful enemy today." "No," Jennifer replied, her voice steady and clear. "I finally recognized that you were never anything else." The sound of retreating footsteps, followed by a car door slamming and an engine starting, signaled Blake's departure. Jennifer remained at the door for a long moment, before closing and locking it, then leaning against it as if suddenly exhausted. When she returned to the dining room, her face was pale but composed. She knelt down to Lucas's level, brushing the flour from his hair with gentle fingers. "Was that Daddy?" he asked hesitantly. Jennifer nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He wanted to see you today, but I reminded him that you'll be with him this weekend for a special Thanksgiving celebration then. He was disappointed, but he understands." It was a gentle fiction, sparing Lucas the ugly truth of the confrontation. I admired Jennifer's restraint, her determination to protect Lucas from the reality of his father's behavior, while still being honest with him in the ways that mattered. "Can we eat now?" Lucas asked, the resilience of childhood allowing him to move past the tension more quickly than any adult could. "I'm starving, and the turkey smells amazing." Jennifer smiled, the strain in her expression easing slightly. "Absolutely. Let's finish setting the table." Later that night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Jennifer and I sat in the living room, the fire crackling in the hearth, casting warm light over the comfortable space she'd created. She had a glass of wine in hand, staring into the flames with a pensive expression. "I'm going to have to go back to court," she said finally, breaking the companionable silence. Today made it clear, Blake isn't going to respect boundaries or Lucas's well-being unless he's legally forced to. I nodded, unsurprised by her conclusion. "What will you ask for?" "Supervised visitation only," she replied without hesitation, "and a formal psychological evaluation of both of us. I've got nothing to hide." Blake, on the other hand, she trailed off, taking a sip of her wine. "If even a fraction of his true nature comes through in professional evaluation, no judge would grant him unsupervised access to a child. He'll fight it," I warned. "He'll pull out all the stops." "I know," Jennifer acknowledged, her expression hardening. "But so will I. I've been compiling evidence, recordings of his threats today, the journal of Lucas's statements after visits, documentation of the parental alienation. I've been following Patricia's advice to the letter." She set down her wine glass decisively. "But I'm not just relying on the legal system. Tomorrow I'm meeting with Margaret. Blake crossed a line today, and she needs to know exactly what kind of man she's harboring in her company. This isn't just about custody anymore. It's about making sure Blake faces consequences for his actions on every front." "What do you think she'll do?" I asked. Jennifer's expression was resolute. "I don't know. But whatever leverage she has over him, it's time to use all of it. No more half measures." 2 days later, the confrontation Jennifer had set in motion unfolded in a way none of us could have anticipated. It was a Saturday morning, and Jennifer had just dropped Lucas off for his weekend visit with Blake. She was on her way to meet me for coffee when her phone rang. Blake's attorney, requesting her immediate presence at his office for an urgent matter concerning Lucas. Alarmed, Jennifer called me from the car. "Blake's attorney wants to meet. Now." He wouldn't say what it's about, just that it's urgent and concerns Lucas. "It could be a trap," I cautioned, already reaching for my car keys. "Let me come with you, or at least call Patricia first." "I'm calling her right now," Jennifer assured me. "But I'm not waiting. If something's wrong with Lucas, text me the address," I interrupted. "I'll meet you there." By the time I arrived at the sleek downtown office building housing Blake's attorney's firm, Jennifer was already inside. The receptionist directed me to a conference room on the 12th floor, where I found Jennifer seated at a long table across from Blake and his attorney, with Patricia at her side. What surprised me most, however, was the presence of Margaret Caldwell at the head of the table, her elegant figure commanding attention despite her advanced age. The tension in the room was palpable as I slipped into the seat beside Jennifer. Blake looked unusually disheveled, his normally perfect appearance marred by dark circles under his eyes and a tie slightly askew. He didn't acknowledge my entrance, his gaze fixed on some middle distance, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Mrs. Mitchell," Blake's attorney, Mr. Ellison, greeted me with professional courtesy. "Thank you for joining us. As I was just explaining to your daughter, we've called this meeting to discuss a significant development in the custody arrangement." "Where's Lucas?" I asked immediately, concern overriding protocol. "He's in the children's playroom down the hall, with a legal assistant supervising," Ellison assured me. "He's perfectly fine." Jennifer's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. "Mr. Ellison was about to explain why they called us here so urgently," she said, her voice tightly controlled. Ellison cleared his throat, glancing briefly at Blake before continuing. "My client has made a decision regarding the current custody arrangement. After careful consideration, he wishes to voluntarily relinquish his claim to shared custody and agree to a modified arrangement of supervised visitation only, with potential for review in 1 year's time. The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Jennifer's grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain. "I don't understand," she said finally. 2 days ago, Blake was threatening to take Lucas away from me entirely. Now he's voluntarily accepting supervised visitation? What changed?" All eyes turned to Blake, who continued to avoid eye contact. It was Margaret who eventually broke the silence. "Perhaps I can provide some context," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard without raising her volume. "Following our agreement several months ago, I've been monitoring Mr. Harrington's personal and professional conduct closely. The incident at your home on Thanksgiving prompted me to conduct a more thorough investigation into certain aspects of his business practices." She turned her cool gaze to Blake. "What I discovered was troubling, to say the least. Financial improprieties far more extensive than initially apparent. Communications with certain international clients that could trigger not just SEC investigations, but criminal charges." Blake's jaw tightened visibly, but he remained silent. "I presented Mr. Harrington with a choice," Margaret continued. "Resign from Caldwell Financial immediately, accept a modified custody arrangement that prioritizes Lucas's well-being, and I would keep the evidence of his financial misconduct confidential, or refuse and face the full legal consequences of his actions." Jennifer looked between Margaret and Blake, understanding dawning in her eyes. "So this isn't a change of heart," she said slowly. "It's self-preservation. The reason is immaterial," Ellison interjected smoothly. "What matters is that my client is willing to accept terms that I believe are in line with what you've been seeking through the court. Supervised visitation twice monthly, to take place at the Family Services Center. No overnight visits for a minimum of 1 year. Communication with Lucas limited to scheduled video calls twice weekly, monitored by you." Patricia leaned forward, her expression professionally skeptical. "And what guarantees do we have that Mr. Harrington will abide by these terms? His history of compliance is spotty at best." "The agreement will be filed with the court and legally binding," Ellison assured her. "Additionally," he hesitated, glancing at Blake again before continuing, "my client has accepted a position with a firm in Seattle, beginning next month. The distance alone will necessitate a more structured visitation schedule." "Seattle?" Jennifer repeated, shock evident in her voice. "You're moving across the country?" For the first time since I'd entered the room, Blake spoke, his voice flat and devoid of its usual charm. "It's a fresh start. For everyone." His gaze finally met Jennifer's, and I was stunned by the emptiness I saw there. No rage, no calculation, just a hollow acceptance of defeat. "The agreement includes provisions for video calls and summer visits. Lucas won't lose his father entirely." "This is what you want?" Jennifer pressed, clearly struggling to reconcile this compliant version of Blake with the man who had terrorized her for years. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "What I want isn't relevant anymore. This is what's happening." Patricia spent the next hour reviewing the proposed agreement line by line, suggesting modifications and clarifications where needed. Throughout the process, Blake remained largely silent, speaking only when directly addressed by his attorney. The fight had gone out of him completely, not surrendered willingly, I suspected, but extracted through whatever leverage Margaret had employed. By early afternoon, a preliminary agreement had been drafted, to be finalized by the attorneys, and filed with the court the following week. As the meeting concluded, Margaret rose first, gathering her elegant coat. "Mrs. Mitchell, Jennifer, may I have a word in private before you leave?" she requested. We followed her into a smaller conference room down the hall, where she closed the door firmly behind us. "I wanted you to know," she said without preamble, "that Blake will not be troubling you further. The position in Seattle is real, but conditional on his continued compliance with the custody agreement. Any violation, any attempt to undermine Jennifer's relationship with Lucas, and not only will the job disappear, but the evidence I've gathered will find its way to the appropriate authorities." "Why are you doing this?" Jennifer asked, the question that had lingered unspoken through months of Margaret's unexpected alliance. "Why go to such lengths for us?" Margaret's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the woman beneath the formidable exterior, partly to right an old wrong. "Robert's treatment of you and your mother was unconscionable, and while I can't undo that history, I can ensure it doesn't continue to harm future generations." She adjusted her coat, her practical nature reasserting itself. and partly because I recognize in you something rare, Jennifer. Integrity, resilience, the qualities I've spent a lifetime looking for in the people I choose to invest in. She reached into her handbag, withdrawing an envelope. Which brings me to this. Once the custody matter is fully resolved, I'd like you to consider a position with the Caldwell Foundation. We fund educational initiatives for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, among other projects. Your experience as both a mother and a survivor of domestic control would bring valuable perspective to our work. Jennifer took the envelope, visibly stunned by the offer. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Margaret suggested. That's all I ask for now. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Jennifer? Blake was wrong about one thing. You were never unwanted or unloved. Robert's rejection was his failure, not yours. Never forget that. With those words, she departed, leaving Jennifer and me standing in momentary silence. Did that really just happen? Jennifer asked finally, the envelope still clutched in her hand. Is it really over? I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the tension that had held her rigid for so long begin to dissolve. Yes, I whispered against her hair. It's really over. We collected Lucas from the playroom, his innocent face lighting up at the sight of us. He chattered happily about the cool toys and games the law firm had provided, oblivious to the life-changing decisions that had been made just rooms away. As we walked out of the building into the crisp December air, Lucas between us holding both our hands, I glanced back at the towering glass structure where Blake remained, diminished and defeated. The confrontation I had feared for so long had come and gone, not with the violent explosion I'd anticipated, but with the quiet implosion of a man whose power had always been more illusion than substance. Jennifer followed my gaze, understanding my thoughts without words. He can't hurt us anymore, she said softly. Any of us. Lucas looked up, curious. Who can't hurt us, Mom? Jennifer smiled down at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. No one, sweetheart. That's exactly the point. Spring came to Woodbridge in a riot of color and renewal. The massive oak tree on Jennifer's property burst into tender green leaves, and the garden beds she and Lucas had prepared in the fall erupted with daffodils and tulips. Life mirrored nature, unfurling with new possibilities after the long, dormant winter. 3 months had passed since the conference room confrontation that had effectively ended Blake's control over Jennifer and Lucas's lives. True to the agreement, he had moved to Seattle in January. His twice-weekly video calls with Lucas were brief and somewhat awkward, but free from the manipulative undertones that had characterized their earlier interactions. Whether this change stemmed from genuine growth or simply the knowledge that Margaret Caldwell was monitoring his compliance, the result was the same. Lucas was no longer caught in the crossfire of parental warfare. I stood on Jennifer's back porch, watching as she and Lucas planted tomato seedlings in the raised beds they'd built together. At 7 years old, his birthday had passed in February with a dinosaur-themed party that had filled the house with the joyful chaos of 20 first-graders. Lucas had grown taller and more confident. The anxious, people-pleasing tendencies that Blake had instilled were gradually giving way to a natural childhood exuberance. "Grandma, look," he called, holding up dirt-covered hands. "I planted 3 all by myself." "Excellent work," I praised, descending the porch steps to inspect his handiwork. "You're becoming quite the gardener. Mom says we can make our own sauce when they grow," he informed me proudly. "And maybe sell the extra ones at the farmer's market." Jennifer straightened from her kneeling position, brushing soil from her jeans. Her hair, longer now and streaked with golden highlights from working outdoors, was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger somehow. The stress lines that had marked her face during the Blake years softened and faded. "I think we've earned a break," she announced, ruffling Lucas's hair. "How about some lemonade?" As Lucas raced ahead to the house, Jennifer linked her arm through mine. "Thanks for coming over to help with the garden," she said, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. "Though I notice you're doing more supervising than planting." I laughed, holding up my arthritic hands. These old joints prefer the supervisory role these days, but I'm happy to provide moral support and admire the results. Inside the kitchen, now fully renovated with warm colors and comfortable seating that invited lingering conversations, Jennifer poured lemonade while Lucas washed his hands at the sink. "I got an email from Blake this morning," she mentioned casually as she handed me a glass. "He's coming back east next month for a business trip. He's asked if he can have an in-person visit with Lucas while he's here." Though her tone was neutral, I could detect the underlying tension in the set of her shoulders. "What did you say?" I asked carefully. "I told him I'd consider it if it takes place at the Family Services Center, as per our agreement." She took a sip of her lemonade, watching Lucas as he bounded out of the kitchen to retrieve something from his room. Part of me wanted to say no outright, but she sighed. Lucas should have the chance to know his father, even if Blake is who he is. I squeezed her arm gently. "You're doing the right thing. Maintaining that relationship, with appropriate boundaries, is in Lucas's best interest long term." Jennifer nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I know, but I worry that even these limited interactions will influence him in ways I can't control. That someday, he'll look at me with Blake's eyes, judge me by Blake's standards. That won't happen," I assured her. "You're raising him with love and respect, with honesty. Children recognize authenticity, Jennifer. Lucas knows who truly has his best interests at heart." Her expression eased slightly. "I hope you're right." She glanced toward the staircase as Lucas's footsteps thundered back down. "I've been trying to focus on the positive. Blake's involvement in our lives is minimal now, and declining further as his Seattle life takes precedence. Meanwhile, we're thriving." Indeed they were. Jennifer had accepted the position with the Caldwell Foundation, working part-time from home with flexible hours that accommodated Lucas's schedule. She'd also returned to writing in the evenings, working on a novel she described as part memoir, part cautionary tale, part triumph over adversity. Lucas was flourishing at his new school, making friends and excelling academically in ways that his rigid education under Blake's watchful eye had never allowed. And the house, Margaret's gift that had initially felt like such a complex inheritance, had truly become a home. Every room reflected Jennifer's emerging sense of self, from the sunroom painted the warm yellow she'd envisioned to the library, where Thomas's books now lined the shelves. A tangible connection to the man who had chosen to be her father in all the ways that mattered. Lucas returned with a sheet of paper clutched in his hand. "Mom, I forgot to show you what I made in art class yesterday." Jennifer examined the colorful drawing with appropriate maternal admiration. "This is wonderful, Lucas. Is this our family?" He nodded eagerly, pointing to the figures. "That's you, and Grandma, and me, and that's our house. And those are the tomatoes we're growing, and that's Rocket." Rocket was the rescue dog Jennifer had adopted in February, a gentle mixed breed who had quickly become Lucas's devoted companion. I studied the drawing, noting what wasn't included. No Blake, no shadow of the past hanging over the bright colors and smiling faces. To Lucas, this was his family now. His mother, his grandmother, his dog, his home. Complete and whole, despite, or perhaps because of, its unconventional composition. Later that afternoon, as Lucas and Rocket played fetch in the yard, Jennifer and I sat on the porch swing her caretaker Miguel had installed as a housewarming gift. The gentle back-and-forth motion was soothing, reminiscent of long-ago evenings when I'd rocked a much younger Jennifer to sleep. "I've been thinking a lot about Thomas lately," Jennifer said, breaking our companionable silence. "About the choice he made to be my father, knowing I wasn't his biological child." I smiled, memories of Thomas warm in my heart. He never saw it as a choice, you know. From the moment he knew I was pregnant, he considered you his daughter. Biology was irrelevant to him. "That's what real love is, isn't it?" Jennifer mused. "Not ownership or control, but acceptance. Wanting the best for someone even when it doesn't benefit you directly." "Yes," I agreed. "That's precisely what it is." She turned to look at me, her expression suddenly earnest. "I never thanked you properly, Mom, for keeping the letter all those years, for showing it to Lucas that day when he repeated Blake's words. If you hadn't preserved that truth, if you hadn't had the courage to reveal it when it mattered most, we might still be trapped in Blake's web." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the credit she was assigning me. "I kept that letter out of fear, not courage. I was afraid of hurting you, afraid of disrupting the life you'd built. I should have told you the truth long before Blake entered the picture." "Maybe," Jennifer acknowledged, "but you told me when it counted most. When the truth could set us free rather than simply causing pain." She took my hand in hers, "And you stood by me through everything that followed. You never once said, 'I told you so,' or blamed me for not seeing Blake clearly from the beginning." "How could I blame you?" I asked softly. "Blake was a master manipulator, and you were young, seeking the family connection that Robert had denied you, that Thomas's death had taken from you. We're all vulnerable to people who seem to offer what we most deeply crave. Jennifer nodded, her gaze drifting to Lucas, who was now lying in the grass with Rocket, both of them apparently exhausted from their game. I've been thinking about what to tell Lucas about all of this when he's older. About Blake, about Robert, about Thomas, about the complexities of family and truth and love. What have you decided? I asked. I think... She paused, considering her words carefully. I think I'll tell him that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, that it's created through choices we make every day, to love, to protect, to support, to forgive, that some people, like his grandfather Thomas, make those choices naturally and joyfully. Others, like Blake, see family as something to possess rather than nurture, and some, like Robert, never find the courage to make those choices at all. She looked at me, her eyes clear and wise beyond her years. And I'll tell him that the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the wisdom to recognize the difference, to cherish those who love us authentically, and to release those who don't, no matter how painful that release might be. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, moved by the profound understanding she'd reached through such difficult experiences. That sounds perfect, I said. And true. I learned it from you, she said simply. From watching you stand up to Blake that day in your living room. From seeing how you loved me enough to tell me a difficult truth, and then loved me enough to help me face the consequences of that truth. We fell silent again, the swing moving gently in the spring breeze, the sounds of Lucas's laughter floating across the yard. In that moment, I felt the completion of a circle, the secrets kept for decades finally revealed, the truths finally spoken, the healing finally begun. The path to this peace had been winding and often painful. There had been moments of fear so profound it had felt like drowning, moments of rage so intense it had threatened to consume us. There had been legal battles and confrontations, threats and manipulations, the slow, agonizing process of disentangling lives once forcibly entwined. But sitting here now, watching my daughter and grandson embrace their new beginning, I understood that sometimes the most damaging secrets are the ones we keep from ourselves, the truths we're afraid to face about the people we love, about the choices we've made, about our own capacity for change and growth. Jennifer had faced those truths with a courage that humbled me. She had reclaimed not just her home and her son, but her very self, the authentic core of who she was, separated from Blake's distorting influence and expectations. "Mom," Jennifer said, breaking into my reflections, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "What's that?" I replied, turning to face her. "The guest cottage, the one at the edge of the property that we've been using for storage. I was thinking of renovating it." She hesitated, a touch of uncertainty in her expression. "For you, if you wanted. Not that you have to give up your house in Brookfield, but maybe as a place to stay more regularly, to be closer to us." The offer caught me by surprise, emotion welling up unexpectedly. "Jennifer, I wouldn't want to impose on your independence. You've worked so hard to create this space for you and Lucas. That's just it," she said earnestly. "You're part of that space, part of our family. Lucas adores having you around. And She paused, her voice softening. "I've spent too many years with artificial distance between us. I'd like you closer, if you want that too." I thought of my little house in Brookfield, filled with memories both sweet and sorrowful. It had been a sanctuary when I needed one, a place to weather the storms of life alone. But perhaps that phase of my life was ending. Perhaps it was time for a new chapter, one where family, real family, built on love and choice rather than obligation, took center stage. "I think I'd like that very much," I said finally. "Not to give up my house entirely, at least not yet, but to have a place here, to be part of your daily lives in a more immediate way." Jennifer's face lit with a smile of such genuine joy that it erased years from her appearance, revealing the bright-spirited girl she had been before Blake, before loss and betrayal had taught her caution. "We could start planning the renovation this summer," she suggested. "Make it exactly how you'd like it. With a porch swing," I stipulated, smiling back at her. "Every good home needs a porch swing." "Absolutely," she agreed. "And maybe a small garden plot of your own. I remember how much you loved growing herbs at the Brookfield house." As we sat discussing the possibilities, Lucas and Rocket bounded up the porch steps, boy and dog equally mud-splattered and exuberant. "Mom, Grandma, can we have cookies?" Lucas asked, his face flushed with healthy exertion. "Rocket and I are starving." Jennifer laughed, rising from the swing. "Wash your hands first, wilderness explorer. And I'm pretty sure dog biscuits are more Rocket style than chocolate chip." As they disappeared into the house, Jennifer paused in the doorway, turning back to me with an expression of quiet contentment. "This is what happiness feels like," she said softly. "Not the perfect, Instagram-ready life Blake tried to create, but this, messy and real and completely ours." I nodded, understanding completely. "The most beautiful things often are messy and real," I replied. "That's how you know they're true." In the golden afternoon light, with the scent of freshly turned earth and blooming flowers in the air, I felt a peace settle over me that had been absent for decades. The burden of secrets kept too long, of truths left unspoken, had finally lifted. In its place was something lighter, brighter, the quiet joy of watching my daughter reclaim her power, rebuild her life, and find her way back to herself. Some would call it justice, that Blake, who had sought to control and diminish Jennifer, was now the diminished one, relegated to brief video calls and supervised visits. Some might even call it revenge, but I knew better. This wasn't about Blake at all, not anymore. It was about Jennifer recognizing her own worth, about Lucas growing up in an environment of love rather than fear, about family being defined by choice and commitment rather than biology or legal documents. It was, quite simply, about truth. Not the harsh, vengeful truth Blake had wielded like a weapon, but the compassionate, liberating truth that sets us free from others' expectations, from our own limiting beliefs, from the narratives that keep us small and afraid. As I watched Jennifer and Lucas through the kitchen window, heads bent together over a cookbook, laughing as they decided what to make for dinner, I sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to Thomas for showing us what real fatherhood looked like, to the universe for giving Jennifer the strength to walk away when she needed to whatever forces had converged to bring us to this moment of quiet triumph. The road ahead would not be without challenges. Blake would remain a part of their lives, if only peripherally. Lucas would grow and ask difficult questions. Jennifer would continue navigating the complex terrain of single parenthood and personal reinvention. But they would face those challenges together, armed with the most powerful tool any family could possess: the truth, spoken with love, held in trust, shared when needed. And in that truth lay the ultimate victory, not over Blake, but over fear itself. The fear that had kept me silent for decades. The fear that had kept Jennifer trapped in a controlling marriage. The fear that had begun to shadow Lucas's bright spirit. That fear had no place in this house, in this family, in this new beginning. It had been replaced by something far more powerful: the quiet courage to live authentically, to love generously, and to trust that some bonds can never truly be broken, no matter what secrets are revealed or what storms must be weathered. In the end, isn't that what we all seek? Not perfection or control or even justice, but simply the freedom to be fully ourselves, surrounded by those who love us not despite our truths, but because of them. As the sun began its slow descent behind the ancient oak tree, painting the Woodbridge house in hues of gold and amber, I knew with bone-deep certainty that Jennifer and Lucas had found that freedom at last. And in witnessing their journey, in playing my small part in their liberation, I had found it too.